Chapter 885. Previously, Sukuin and I had some guesses as to why the demonic beast had kidnapped the children, but we didn't know the inside story. After looking through the demonic beast's memories, we finally understood the crux of the matter. After understanding this, I became even more worried. However, the demonic beast's memories didn't have any information about where the children had gone, only the position of their leader. I pondered for a moment. Since these demonic beasts needed Sciention energy to help them cultivate, the only outcome for those children was to be eaten by them. In this way, if we move even half a step slower, I'm afraid that some of the children will die because of it. The situation instantly became critical. I quickly weighed the pros and cons. Although I was worried that the leader's cultivation might be at the half-step sunset realm, I couldn't care too much about that in order to save little Wang Li. I turned my head to look at Sukuin. He had the Eastern Emperor Bell. If he could fight the enemy with me, we would have a higher chance of success. Of course, I still needed his agreement. After making up my mind, I quickly explained the current situation to Sukuin. Afterwards, I asked him if he wanted to come with me. Sukuin was a hot-blooded person. After listening to me, he pondered for a moment before nodding. I came here for the sake of those children, so there's no reason for me to refuse. Let's go. Hearing that, I was overjoyed. I sent my spiritual power into Sukuin's body to help him recover his cultivation. Afterwards, I grabbed his shoulder and flew towards the demonic beast leader's position. Soon, we arrived at the edge of another cliff. In the distance, we could see a huge, dark cave below the cliff. It was the cave where the demonic beast leader was. Before we could get close, the demonic beast leader sensed our aura and walked out of the cave. It stood at the cave entrance with its hands clasped behind its back, looking at us from a distance. The demonic beast leader's appearance was the same as the previous demonic beasts. It seemed that they were of the same race. This surprised me. The mountain and sea realm had been separated from the human world for thousands of years. Their race had actually left their legacies in both places, which was quite extraordinary. Although his face was ugly, the demonic beast leader's mannerisms were much more elegant. He stood there with his hands behind his back. If one didn't look at his head, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that he was a human. I spread out my spiritual sense and roughly sensed it, but I couldn't sense the specific cultivation of this leader. It seemed that my earlier guess was right, that his cultivation was indeed above mine. However, I wasn't too afraid, as it didn't give me the same feeling that old President Li, Celestial Master Zhang, and the others had. From this, I could deduce that his cultivation hadn't reached half a step into the Sciention realm, but the middle or late stages of the Sciention realm. Of course, the difference between these two realms is still very big. If it's just the middle stage of ascension, I believe that I alone will be able to put up a fight. But if it's the late stage of ascension, Sukuin and I will be very lucky to be able to save those children today. With these thoughts in mind, we soon arrived in front of the cave. When we got close, I secretly activated the 9-star Heavenly Dipper and used the power of clear insight to sense it. Although I still couldn't completely determine its cultivation base, I could vaguely sense that it was in the middle stage of ascension. I breathed a sigh of relief, feeling much more relaxed. Seeing us land, the demonic beast leader's expression didn't change. In a low, hoarse voice, he said, "Ants, you dare to trespass on my tribe's territory. I was already being lenient by not paying attention to you earlier. I never imagined that you would dare to trespass on my immortal's cave. How impudent." I was shocked to hear the demonic beast leader speak the language of the human tribe. However, I quickly recovered. Actually, after reaching the Heavenly Master level, demonlings could assume human form and speak the language of the human tribe. It was just that with the opening of the mountain and sea realm, the ordinary demonic beasts that had absorbed the ancient wildlands energy had only just begun to develop their cultivation bases and hadn't yet mastered any divine abilities. Because of that, none of the demonic beasts I had killed had spoken, which was why I had forgotten about it. As for the leader of the demonic beasts, he was a demonling from the mountain and sea realm and naturally possessed all sorts of divine abilities and techniques. It was only natural for him to speak the human tribe. Furthermore, The words he had just spoken shocked me. Apparently, Su Kuan and I had been under his control when we trespassed. Thinking about it, it made sense. Considering the level of his cultivation base, his spiritual sense should have been able to cover the entire area. It wouldn't have been difficult for him to detect an intruder. That was one of the reasons I hadn't allowed Zhang Canwen and Fatty to come with us. Although we had been shocked by his words, Zhang Canwen and I had long since weighed the pros and cons, so we didn't have much to say. I said, "You abducted children, a shameless act to the extreme. You dare to call yourself You've really made a fool of yourselves. If you hand over those children, I might allow you to flee. If you resist stubbornly, then don't blame your grandpas for being cruel." After confirming that he only had a mid-ascension cultivation base, I felt much more confident. Naturally, I wasn't willing to take any losses. Hearing my words, not to mention the monster leader, even Su Kuan, who was standing at the side, was shocked. On the other hand, the leader of the demon beast was angered to the point of being reborn, and the loftiness he intentionally maintained in his voice had completely vanished. What remained was only exasperation as he said fiercely, "What an arrogant kid. No wonder the human world has declined so much. It turns out that everyone is a brainless and arrogant person. That's good too. When I eat those spiritual children later, I'll use the two of you to accompany my meal." My reaction was completely different from his. After listening to his words, I was overjoyed. From his words, it wasn't difficult to determine that little Wang Li and the other children should still be alive. Since they were fine, I didn't have any worries. While feeling at ease, I directly spat out the Xianyuan sword from my mouth. The Dao Qi in my body flowed continuously into the Xianyuan sword. When the monster leader saw my actions, his originally disdainful face suddenly changed to one of shock. He pointed at me and said, "Where did your power come from? Where did my power come from?" I was stunned at first, but then reacted. Could it be that he was referring to the Dao Qi in my body? In the mountain and sea realm, there were only the Magi and Yao races. This monster leader had just come out of the mountain and sea realm, so it was normal that he wasn't familiar with Dao Qi. However, I still had some doubts in my heart. His cultivation was above mine, so even if he had never seen Dao Qi, he shouldn't be so shocked. In fact, there was even a trace of panic in his shock. Just as I was feeling puzzled, the monster leader suddenly stared at me with a burning gaze. In his eyes, panic was gradually replaced by greed. He laughed. "Fine, since you have the heart to seek death. How can I not help you? After I swallow you, ascension is just around the corner." After saying that, he threw his head back and laughed. It looked like he was about to attack. I naturally didn't dare to be careless. I hurriedly signaled Su Kuan to step back and let me deal with him. Although Su Kuan controlled the Eastern Emperor Bell, his cultivation was only at the Yang spirit level. There was no need for him to take risks when facing this middle-stage monster leader. After seeing my signal, Su Kuan didn't try to be brave. He nodded slightly and quickly retreated to the side. After he left, I didn't wait for the monster leader to attack. I stepped out of the 9-star Heavenly Dipper and circulated Dao Qi on the Xianyuan sword. In the blink of an eye, a ray of Xianyuan sword Qi flew towards the monster leader's face. This attack was just a test. The monster leader had a mocking expression on his face. With a light snort, he spun his hands and produced a ball of smoke, which he threw towards the sword Qi. Soon, the two balls of energy collided, causing a huge explosion. Waves of air surged in the surroundings, and dust flew everywhere. Although both sides did not use their full strength, the people who rushed forward and the flying leaves had great power. When the explosion dissipated, there was already a large pit several meters deep on the ground. Within a radius of several dozen meters, all the trees were snapped in the middle, and the short flowers and grass were also lying on the ground. Su Kuan, who had been standing not too far away, had already flown up into the air in order to avoid the attack. I raised my eyes to look at the monster leader. It was obvious that he still didn't take me seriously. At that moment, he was still standing with his hands behind his back. He didn't seem to have any intention of initiating an attack. Seeing his actions, I wasn't annoyed. Instead, I was happy. Facing these monsters, the most troublesome thing for me wasn't their high cultivation, but their endless secret techniques. Just like the giant bird that I had killed earlier and the ferocious beast that Sukuin had used the Easter Emperor Bell to disperse, they all had their own secret techniques that were quite powerful. Facing those secret techniques, I might be in trouble if I wasn't careful. However, if I were to attack freely, I wouldn't have to worry about that. I immediately transferred the witchcraft aura in my body to my life palace and used the witchcraft aura transformation technique. After a few seconds, a dark green sword appeared in my palm. I immediately threw it at the monster leader. After the small sword left my hand, the witchcraft aura emitted from it. 1 turned into 2, and 2 turned into 4. In the blink of an eye, there were 10 small swords that flew towards the monster leader. Seeing my method, a trace of astonishment flashed across the leader's face. He stopped mocking me and quickly spat out a mouthful of smoke to face the 10 small swords formed from witchcraft aura. I had already seen the power of the smoke technique when Sukuin had fought with the small demon. Its power was indeed extraordinary. Now that it was being used by the monster leader with a high cultivation, I naturally didn't dare to be careless. I stared at it closely, ready to make my next move. Very quickly, the dark green sword collided with the smoke. I thought that the 2 attacks would cancel each other out like before. However, I didn't expect that the dark green sword would directly pass through the smoke and continue to rush towards the monster leader. The smoke didn't dissipate and continued to charge towards me. This situation was really beyond my expectations. In a hurry, I didn't have time to think too much and dodged. However, I didn't expect that the smoke would also change direction and continue to chase after me. It seemed that the monster leader's cultivation wasn't shallow. After repeatedly dodging to no avail, I had no choice but to stop in my tracks. Once again, I mobilized the witchcraft aura in my body and combined it with the power of the sun god to set up a barrier in front of me to block the smoke that continuously chased after me. When I stopped, the smoke hit the witchcraft aura barrier. It didn't have much power, but after it hit the barrier, it was like maggots in a bone, wrapping around the entire barrier and slowly corroding it. Chapter 886. After the situation on my side stabilized, I raised my eyes to look at the monster leader. He was still standing at his original position, but there was a transparent object in front of him, blocking the dozens of small swords in front of him. It was a pity that I hadn't comprehended the unity of mind and spirit. Once the small swords left my hands, I wouldn't be able to control them again. I could only watch as the dozens of small swords were nibbled away bit by bit in front of the monster leader. After a short while, the dark green swords disappeared. The monster leader retracted his hands and looked at me. At this moment, I suddenly understood. Although the monster leader didn't put me in his eyes and had a face full of disdain, in reality, the people who had ascended were all scheming people. The various methods he had used just now were actually to consume my spirit power. The only difference between me and him was our cultivation levels. Since he saw that I wasn't afraid at all, it was obvious that he had already predicted this. Thus, he attacked my weakest point. Once he exhausted my power to the point where I couldn't use any powerful spells, he would inevitably lose. After understanding this, I removed the barrier in front of me. I estimated that I had already used up about 20% of my spiritual power. If I had the jade bracelet to replenish my power like before, I wouldn't be afraid. However, the jade bracelet had disappeared when the mountain and sea realm opened, so I couldn't use it to recover my cultivation. Fortunately, when I was advancing to the next realm, there was some spiritual power in my body. Although I couldn't directly use it to defend against enemies, I discovered that this spiritual power could not only help people quickly recover from injuries, but it could also stimulate the heavenly meridians, speeding up their circulation and producing a large amount of shaman power in a short period of time. Even though I had yet to figure out what this spiritual power was, it was born in my body and it was so useful. Hence, I treated it as something that naturally came with me after my breakthrough. At that moment, I activated it and rapidly recovered my witchcraft chi. In just a short while, I had recovered 20% of my witchcraft chi. I had originally planned to recover my cultivation in one go, but the monster leader seemed to have sensed my intentions. He moved and appeared in front of me in the blink of an eye. His hands turned into sharp claws, and he grabbed at my chest. He was extremely fast, but my reaction wasn't slow either. I immediately held the Xianyuan sword horizontally in front of me. The leader seemed to be able to see the power of the Xianyuan sword. He immediately raised his claws, avoiding my chest and aiming at my face. When it came to close combat, the difference in cultivation would be revealed without a doubt. At such a close distance, it could change its route at will, but I couldn't keep up with its rhythm. In a hurry, I didn't have the time to raise the Xianyuan sword. Helplessly, I could only activate my cultivation and retreat several meters, pulling away from the leader. Seeing me retreat, the leader immediately chased after me. However, in the blink of an eye, I finally found a gap and immediately took the initiative. The Taoist chi in my body circulated, and the sword cultivation technique entered my life palace, which was displayed by the Yang spirit. In the blink of an eye, the Xianyuan sword was filled with Tao Qi again. It flew out of my hand and floated in front of me. At this moment, the leader had already caught up to me. However, when he saw this move, he forcefully stopped his body. His expression darkened. It was obvious that he realized that the might of the Xianyuan sword, which was activated by this sword cultivation technique, was extraordinary. He couldn't stand still, so I waited for him to exhaust himself. Naturally, I wouldn't waste such a good opportunity. I immediately urged the Xianyuan sword to spin quickly around my body. Immediately, a wave of air appeared around me, wrapping me in it. As the wave of air rolled, the sand and stones under my feet flew, and I kept sinking. In just a few seconds, a large pit that was dozens of meters deep appeared where I was standing, and the water of the underground river was about to gush out. In this wave of air, the Xianyuan sword continued to emit golden Taoist chi. In the next second, the wave of air suddenly stopped, and the Taoist chi formed a golden wall in front of me. After that, even cracks appeared on the golden wall, and numerous small golden swords were being ceaselessly formed within the cracks. After the countless small golden swords were formed, they suddenly gathered together and rose into the air, shooting toward the leader. Using the power of my essence yang divinity after the ascension, as well as my sword cultivation techniques to power the Xianyuan sword, was my most powerful killing move. Back in the realm gate of the mountain and sea realm, I had used this technique to hold off Celestial Master Zhang, who was half a step into the ascension of sunset. That was why I was confident that I would be able to escape alive from him. The demonic beast leader's cultivation base was only at the mid-ascension stage, so I was confident that I could use this technique to kill him. As the tens of thousands of golden swords shot forward, I used the remaining shaman chi in my body to jump out of the pit, my gaze fixed on the demonic beast leader. Although I was confident, I didn't dare to be careless before the result was certain. After all, the leader of the demonic beast was a greater demon from the mountain and sea realm. Perhaps he had some kind of powerful secret technique. Facing the golden rain of swords, even a mid-stage rush realm cultivator would have no chance of dodging. The demonic beast leader clearly recognized this as well, so it did not retreat at all. Instead, it waved its arms and roared. The sound waves from its mouth caused the surroundings to tremble. Following that, traces of blood seeped out of its eyes and mouth. Next, the antennae on his head began to grow madly. In the blink of an eye, they were more than 3 meters long. The antennae twisted together into a ball and then exploded. Dark red blood sprayed out, forming a barrier in front of the demonic beast leader in an attempt to block the attack. A series of secret techniques were unleashed. Based on the power of the attacks alone, it was obvious that they were extraordinary. Unfortunately, in the face of my Yang spirit, as well as the Xianyuan sword rain powered by sword cultivation techniques, his actions were like a mantis trying to stop a chariot. The rain of golden swords fell on the dark red barrier, but didn't meet any resistance. It was like a sharp knife cutting through tofu, piercing through it and stabbing into the demonic beast leader's body. A second later, the demonic beast leader's face froze, and its body suddenly exploded, turning into smoke and dust. The dark blood screen in front of it also disappeared. Seeing that the monster leader was dead, I finally let out a long breath and relaxed my body. A moment later, Su-kun returned to my side. When he looked at me, his eyes were filled with shock and worship. He exclaimed, "Brother Zhou is truly a genius. You've used the power of the Xianyuan sword to its pinnacle. You were a young phoenix back then, but now you've become a proud son of heaven. I truly admire you." To be honest, even with my current state of mind, I couldn't help but feel happy after killing a demonic beast at the intermediate stage of the Ascension realm. However, I didn't have any complacent thoughts after hearing Su-kun's words. I only smiled and waved my hand. "Brother Su, you're overpraising me. Now that the situation is gradually changing, and you're in possession of the Eastern Emperor Bell, the head of the 10 great divine instruments, your cultivation will definitely increase by leaps and bounds. Brother Su is more deserving of the title of a proud son of heaven than I am." Hearing my words, Su-kun hurriedly waved his hand, as though he wanted to say something polite. However, I stopped him and said, "The demonic beast leader is still dead. Let's hurry and find the children." After saying that, I headed into the cave of the demonic beast leader. Su-kun hurriedly followed me. The cave also had a restriction set up by the demonic beast leader. However, with its death, the restriction had already dissipated. We quickly found the children from before. When we met again, their faces were filled with panic. It was obvious that they had suffered a lot of fright on the way here. Fortunately, none of the children were missing. Even the child that I had first seen who was abducted was here, which made me feel much more at ease. In the demonic beast territory, the surrounding ancient desolate aura had gathered. Moreover, there was also the demonic beast's irritable aura, which was extremely harmful to the children. In just a few short days, many of the weak children had already shown adverse reactions. Hence, I had to bring them away as soon as possible. If it was on a normal day, I would be able to bring the children away from this place. However, when I killed the demonic beast leader, I had expended a lot of my energy. It would be difficult for me to rely on my own strength. Hence, I called Su-kun to cast a spell together with me. We stirred up the wind to sweep the children out of the cave and flew towards the exit. After about half an hour, we returned to the cliff that we had come from. Following the death of the demonic beast leader, the restriction naturally dissipated. We leaped out of the cave where the restriction had previously been. In an instant, we had returned from the foul, demonic beast territory to the human world. After coming out, I immediately saw Zhang Kanwen and the fatty. They were still guarding outside the restriction, just like what I had told them. Even after the restriction had dissipated, they didn't rashly enter. Seeing us come out, both of their faces lit up with joy. The fatty immediately walked to my side and asked what had happened, while Zhang Kanwen immediately went forward to hug little Wang Li. He didn't speak much and didn't show any concern for his well-being. He just constantly caressed little Wang Li's body and checked his body. His gaze was filled with tenderness. After a while, Zhang Kanwen got up and looked at me. He sighed. "It's all thanks to you this time. To be honest, ever since Wang Li was abducted, my heart has been hanging by a thread." For him to say such words, it was obvious that the past 2 days had been a lot of torture for him. I was also deeply moved. I quickly waved my hand. "Brother Zhang, what are you saying? I watched little Wang Li grow up. I could be considered his martial uncle. What's there to say?" Zhang Kanwen grinned. He obviously felt that it was pretentious, so he waved his hand and didn't say anything else. At this moment, the fatty and Su-kun had already started chatting. The two of them could be considered to have known each other. They chatted for a long time before stopping. At this moment, I was already thinking about how to settle the young children. Seeing that they had finished chatting, I called Su-kun over and asked him if he had any ideas. Hearing my question, Su-kun looked hesitant. The human world is in chaos now. The families of these young children who were abducted to this place must have met with misfortune. How to settle them is really a problem. He was right. There were very few cultivators in the human world. facing those demonic beasts. Only people like Zhang Canwen, who had the cultivation of heavenly master and above, could survive and even chase after them. As for the parents and family of the other young children, they must have met with misfortune. It wouldn't be a problem to settle one or two young children. In the feng shui metaphysics shop, whether it was Lu Chuanda, Xie Chenghua, or Wang Kuan and his wife, they all had the ability to take care of them. However, there were dozens of young children in front of me. It would be really difficult to settle them with my strength alone. After thinking for a moment, I turned to look at Su Kuan. He came from a family of metaphysics. Whether it was his family or the Metaphysics Society, they were both extremely powerful. They had many subordinates, so taking care of these young children shouldn't be a problem. Unexpectedly, after I told him my idea, Su Kuan's expression became awkward. After a moment of silence, he said, "After the mountain and sea realm opened, old President Li left the Metaphysics Society with some of the talented youths. Although the Metaphysics Society still existed, it was almost an empty shell. Furthermore, the human world was in chaos, and everyone was in danger. The Metaphysics Society's aristocratic families were like birds startled by the mere twang of a bough. For the time being, they were in hiding and didn't care about what was happening in the outside world. As for the Su family, they weren't a particularly large metaphysics society. In order to protect themselves, they didn't have the time to care about others. Su Kuan had come out this time because his ideals didn't agree with his family's, and that was why he had left in a fit of pique. One man, one sword. He wanted to do what little he could for this broken human world. After listening to him, I understood the situation in the human world. Old President Li's matter was just as I had expected. He had waited for 1,000 years to open the mountain and sea realm and find a chance to ascend. No matter how chaotic the human world was, it couldn't stop his dream of ascending. The Metaphysics Society's actions weren't wrong either. Everyone was in danger, and no matter who it was, they had to protect themselves first. But because of this, the children had become a problem. Just as we were at our wits' end, the fatty suddenly interjected. After the mountain and sea realm opens, there aren't many magi left. After finding them, they've been settled in the Medicine King's Valley. That place is protected by the magi, and ordinary demonic beasts can't enter. Compared to the situation in the outside world, the Medicine King's Valley is a rare refuge. Since the children have nowhere to go, it would be better to send them to the Medicine King's Valley. The fatty's words made sense. After listening to him, my eyes brightened, and I agreed. After the mountain and sea realm was opened, the Valley of the Medicine Kings had already made plans to settle down the magi. Since they hadn't found many magi yet, the remaining space was perfect for the children. It was a win-win situation. After deciding on this method, we didn't want to stay here any longer. I called the fatty and told him to bring the children safely to the Medicine King's Valley. Chapter 887. Hearing the fatty's question and looking at the smile on his face, I realized that this guy's motive for suggesting the Medicine King Valley to settle down the children wasn't pure. On the surface, he said it was to settle down the children, but he actually wanted to use this matter to bring me back to the Medicine King Valley. I didn't think much about it and waved my hand to refuse. Although I had the title of a saint, I wasn't a witch, and that place didn't belong to me. Moreover, I was still worried about Tao Wu's matter, and I didn't want to see Nangong's hypocritical appearance. Seeing that I refused, the fatty wanted to persuade me, but I waved my hand to stop him. Just as he was about to leave with Zhang Canwen and the others, Su Kuan suddenly stood up and said, "Big Brother Zhou, the journey to the Valley of the Medicine Masters is likely to be quite long, and judging from the current situation, the journey must be extremely dangerous. I can go with him, but with our strength, it's still not very safe. So, I'd like to ask Big Brother Zhou to go with us to protect these children." The two of them were whispering together just now. I thought they were just chatting, but now it seemed that the fatty had most likely asked him to be a lobbyist. Before I could reply, Zhang Qinwen heard their words. I guessed that it was because of Wang Li that he pitted the other children, so he came over and persuaded me to travel together. Since everyone said so, I felt bad to refuse again. Helpless, I could only agree to it, but I also told the fatty in advance that I would leave after sending the children there. Seeing that I had relented, the fatty was overjoyed and naturally wouldn't ask for anything more. He quickly nodded and signaled for us to leave immediately. The four of us took dozens of children and quickly headed in the direction of the Medicine King Valley. Along the way, the places we passed were full of devastation. Along the way, we also killed a few monsters, but at this time, the vast world was full of monsters. Killing them wouldn't be of much use and could only serve as a consolation. By the time he arrived at the Valley of the Medicine Masters, it was already 3 days later in the evening. As soon as he entered the valley, he discovered that it was brightly lit and bustling with people. Many people seemed to be hurrying about, as if preparing for something in full swing. I turned to ask the fatty, but he looked puzzled. It was obvious that he didn't know what was going on either. It was just a casual question, so I didn't think too much about it. I told the fatty to bring the child back to the village, while I planned to leave with Jean Canwin and the rest. At that moment, a female voice sounded from behind me. Bai Ling greets the saint. Saints? In the past, I would have been able to calmly accept this form of address, but now I felt that it was rather jarring. They kept saying that they would follow my lead, but at the critical moment, they went against my decision. This so-called sage seemed to be high and mighty, but in reality, he was just a chess piece that they could use at will. Now that he's being so polite, it's obvious that he has a use for me. I sneered inwardly. I didn't mind Bai Ling and left. Seeing that I had left, Bai Ling quickly chased after me and knelt in front of me. Saint, please stay. The holy maiden sacrificed herself to save our people. The entire witch tribe feels guilty. But this matter has already happened. I implore the saint to take care of the lives of the common people. Sacrificing herself to save her people. She made it sound so easy. I sneered inwardly and walked around her, continuing to walk forward. I had only taken a few steps when Bai Ling didn't seem to want to give up. She chased after me and continued. Saint, please calm down. Nowadays, everyone in the world is in danger. The 3 sects of Buddhism, Taoism, and Taoism have abandoned the world. The matter of the mountain and sea realm was led by the witch tribe. Now that there is a calamity, the witch tribe should shoulder the burden. However, Senior Nangong is missing, and the witch tribe has no one in charge. I implore the saint to stay in Medicine King Valley and control the situation. Her words surprised me. First of all, Nangong was missing. Could it be that he was like President Li and the others, disregarding everything to search for immortal fate? It was highly possible. After all, his cultivation was high enough, and the witch tribe wasn't in any trouble. Considering his previous selfish actions, it was normal for him to do such a thing. What surprised me even more was Bai Ling's other words. The witch tribe should shoulder the burden and save the common people. Looking at the current situation, it was no different from a joke for the witch tribe to save the common people. However, Bai Ling's expression was solemn. It was obvious that she wasn't joking. To be honest, although I hated Nangong and didn't have a good impression of the witch tribe, I would feel bad if I didn't do anything in the current situation. Originally, I had planned to travel the world with Su Kuan. We would do our best to kill monsters and save the common people. So, when I saw Bai Ling say such words with the body of a delicate woman, I felt admiration. Of course, admiration was admiration. If I stayed here, Nangong would definitely come back in the future. Instead of causing trouble, it was better to make a decision now. I still didn't plan to stay. After I refused again, before Bai Ling could say anything, Zhang Canwen, who was standing next to me, suddenly spoke. He first asked me, now that the world is in trouble, what do you plan to do after you leave? I didn't know what he meant, but I still told him I planned to travel the world with Su Kuan and kill monsters. After listening to me, Zhang Canwen nodded and continued to ask, the cultivation of the two of you isn't ordinary. The normal monsters shouldn't be your match. However, with just the two of you, even if you fight day and night, how many monsters can you kill? His words made me frown. I naturally understood what he meant, but my heart was still conflicted. Zhang Canwen didn't care about me and continued to speak with a solemn expression, My grandfather and father passed away early, when Fei and I didn't have any impression of them. However, when my master passed down his Taoism to me, he told me their story and told me that when a cultivator wields power, he will have to shoulder responsibility. No one will force you to fulfill this responsibility, but it will bind your heart and soul. Saying that, he turned to look at me. After staying silent for a while, he continued, "Back then, I didn't understand what my master meant, so I asked him. However, he didn't explain to me and only asked me to write down the Song of Righteousness 100 times. From then on, I understood this responsibility. I don't know how to describe this responsibility, but I call it righteousness. Something like righteousness has always had nothing to do with others, but only with one's own heart. When you make a decision, ask yourself first, did you follow your heart? After Zhang Canwen finished speaking, I fell into silence. Old Master Zhao Dingwu had told me the story of his grandfather and father. It wasn't just the two of them. Going back further, the first minister of literature was an existence that shouldered the entire world in times of crisis. They were great, and I agreed with their values. However, when it came to me, it was difficult for me to get rid of distracting thoughts and listen to my heart. After staying silent for a long time, Bai Ling seemed to be unable to wait any longer. She came forward again and said sadly, "Saint, please don't abandon the witch tribe." I sighed and couldn't bring myself to refuse. After a long while, I finally nodded my head. Seeing my action, Bai Ling was overjoyed. She quickly told me that the witch tribe had gathered in the Medicine King Valley to welcome the return of the Mountain and Sea Realms witch tribe. At the same time, they would discuss the witch tribe's plan to fight against the monster tribe. She asked me to go to the meeting hall, where the meeting would start soon. Since she had already nodded, I had nothing else to say. I turned and called Zhang Canwen and Su Kun, then followed by Ling into the village. As soon as we entered the village, the fatty had obviously received the news. He hurriedly came out with a group of people to greet me. I knew that the witch tribe of the Mountain and Sea Realm had returned, but looking at the current situation, including the people from the Medicine King Valley, there were no more than 200 or 300 of them. It was clear that the witch tribe of the Mountain and Sea Realm had not survived for thousands of years. Nangong had clearly overestimated the strength of the witch tribe. If he had known that there were not many of them left, I don't know if he would have set his mind on opening the Mountain and Sea Realm. After the hurried greetings, I didn't have much to say. Bai Ling and the others clustered around me as I passed through the crowd and arrived at the meeting hall. The meeting hall wasn't very spacious. Only a few dozen people were left inside, while the others retreated to the outside. Just now, when I was outside, the crowd was in a mess, so I didn't pay much attention to it. Now that I was seated, I looked at the witch tribe members who had come from the Mountain and Sea Realm. The first was a young man sitting not far from me. He looked to be about the same age as me, and his cultivation base was at the peak of the Yang God realm, not much weaker than mine. Presumably, his talent was extraordinary. Perhaps he noticed my gaze, but he rose to his feet and took the initiative to bow. "Greetings, Saint. I am Duo-ji, the chief of the Mountain and Sea Realms witch tribe." For him to be the chief of a tribe at such a young age, he must have some tricks up his sleeve. With that in mind, I clasped my hands in greeting. "So you're a descendant of Shinnong. There's no need to be so polite." The chief of the witch tribe was naturally a direct descendant of Shinnong, so I was just being polite. However, when Duo-ji heard that, he quickly waved his hands and sighed. To tell you the truth, the last chief of our tribe was the last of the Flame Emperor's bloodline. 100 years ago, he perished in a battle against the monster race. Since then, there has been no direct descendant of Shinnong in our tribe. I'm only a branch descendant, not a descendant of the Flame Emperor. I was just casually mentioning this. Furthermore, as long as one was a member of the witch tribe, their blood would naturally flow through their veins. There was no need to distinguish between the direct and branch descendants of the Flame Emperor. After chatting with Duo-ji for a bit, Bai Ling walked over to my side and whispered that everyone had gathered. Next, everyone would be discussing official matters. Because I didn't know the specifics, I didn't say anything. Instead, I gestured for Bai Ling to introduce the main points of today's meeting. She stood up and briefly explained that they had already formulated a preliminary plan. They planned to divide the tribe into several groups and build layers of defense in the outside world. While protecting the Medicine King Valley, they would also accept refugees and attract other cultivators to fight against the monsters. After listening to her introduction, I nodded to myself. The plan that Bai Ling had formulated was feasible. After all, the witch tribe was currently weak. From a practical point of view, defense was the most important thing. Otherwise, if the Medicine King Valley was invaded by the monsters, they wouldn't even have a place to hide. There would be no need to mention anything else. As for the specific layers of defense, accepting refugees, and attracting other cultivators, each of them should be a decision that Bai Ling had made after careful consideration. They were all very meaningful. While confirming Bai Ling's thoughts, I had a different opinion in my heart. The current power of the witch tribe was really too weak. There were only a few hundred people, and most of their cultivations were below the sun god. Apart from me, there wasn't even a single cultivator who had broken through to the next realm. With such strength, as long as a few great monsters came, the weak line of defense would no longer exist. Even if there weren't any great monsters, it would take many years for them to truly have the strength to fight against the monsters by accepting refugees and absorbing other cultivators step by step. Chapter 888. With a plan in mind, I briefly explained it to everyone. After hearing what I said, everyone was silent for a moment. Most of them seemed to be in deep thought and nodded in agreement. However, there were some quick-witted people who looked worried, especially Bai Ling. She asked, "Although it is a matter of life and death, the conflict between the witches has yet to be resolved. If the so-called orthodox factions take the chance to attack us, won't we be digging our own graves by doing so?" Although Bai Ling's words were harsh, they made sense. From the many things that had happened in the past, those people who claimed to be from the righteous sects were indeed questionable in their conduct. Let's not talk about the past. Just look at the current situation. The Metaphysics Association, Dragon Tiger Mountain, and the other giants in the cultivation world had closed their doors. They didn't care about worldly matters. They were far less responsible than the small witches. As for Bai Ling's worries, no one dared to say that the sects wouldn't follow the so-called in order to resist foreign aggression strategy. Hence, after hearing what Bai Ling had said, everyone, including me, quietened down. I kept thinking. Every decision I made would affect the fate of the witches and also the great cause of fighting against the monster race. I couldn't afford to make any mistakes. After a while, I still hadn't come to a decision. I turned to look at Jean Canwin. He had been standing next to me, so he naturally knew my worries. After a while, he moved closer to me and whispered, "In actual fact, there's no need to think about it. With the current situation, if we don't ally with the other sects, we will be digging our own graves if we fight against the monster race. Hence, we can only take the risk." I had a rough plan in mind. My only concern was that I didn't want to bring the 200 to 300 witches that I'd spent so much effort to gather to a dead end. After hearing what Jean Cameron had said, I understood that I actually didn't have a choice. Since the witches had chosen to fight against the monster race, they were standing at the heart of the struggle. The danger was unavoidable. After pondering for a while, I finally decided to take the risk. In actual fact, even Bai Ling, who had questioned me earlier, knew about the current situation. After hearing my decision, she didn't refute but accepted it in silence. After confirming the plan, the next step was to implement it. The witches and the righteous sects didn't have any channels of communication. If we wanted to ally with them, we could only go to them and persuade them. Thus, I asked the people sitting here if there was anyone who was willing to go to the various sects to lobby. As soon as he finished speaking, the noisy hall instantly quietened down. Everyone looked at each other, but no one spoke. This situation was not unexpected. The lobbyists were like the envoys in ancient times when two armies faced off against each other. The danger was self-evident. Aside from the danger, the sorcerer tribe had always pursued the strategy of hiding themselves. In truth, there were almost no sorcerer tribe members who traveled outside. They did not understand the entire world of metaphysics, so it was indeed difficult for them to play the role of a lobbyist. While everyone was silent, the fatty suddenly stood up and said to me, "Although my Zhanshe sect can't compare to those Taoist giants, we still have some prestige in the metaphysics world. I can make a trip back to my sect and persuade my master to come and help." The fat man's words made my eyes brighten. It was as he had said. The Zhanshe faction wasn't a Taoist faction, but it was famous in the metaphysics world. If they came, it would be a great boost. If there's one, there'll be a second. When the time comes, Reverend Guan will lobby for us, and everything will be much easier. As soon as he finished speaking, Zhang Qinwen also stood up and cupped his fist at me. Although I've left the Metaphysics Society, I'm still an old member. When I was working at the headquarters, I had a few close friends. Now that I've come forward to lobby for them, I'm sure they'll consider it. I nodded. Although Su Kuan had told me that a large number of people from the Metaphysics Society had left with President Li, the organization was still there, and there were many people left. The cultivators of the Metaphysics Society were people who wandered the mortal world. During the fight against the monster race, they received many refugees and roped in other cultivators. To the simple sorcerer tribe members who had lived their whole lives in the Medicine King Valley or the Mountain and Sea realm, it wasn't suitable for them. However, the members of the Metaphysics Society were more than suitable. After Zhang Kanwen spoke, Su Kuan, who was at the side, revealed an embarrassed expression. He whispered to me that he could follow Zhang Kanwen to the Metaphysics Association before returning to the Su family to check on the situation. However, he couldn't guarantee that the Su family would agree. Hearing him say this, I laughed out loud. It was already extremely good that he had such an attitude. As for whether or not those metaphysical aristocratic families would be persuaded, I wasn't sure. Naturally, I wouldn't give Su Kuan any hard and fast demands. As the three of them expressed their stance, the situation became much better. However, I still had other ideas. The Divination Sect, the Broken Metaphysics Association, the Su family, and the Wizard Tribe. The alliance of the four sounded like a lot, but in reality, it was just a drop in the bucket. It was far from enough to fight against the monster race. While I was lobbying them, I also had to find out what the Taoist and Buddhist sects were thinking. Regardless of whether I succeeded or not, I had to have an attitude first. Among the people present, I was the only one who had the capital to negotiate with the Taoist and Buddhist sections. Therefore, there was no need to worry about who to choose. After coming up with a rough plan, I told everyone the details. After listening to them and seeing that no one had any objections, I didn't delay any further. I stood up and gave some instructions to the fatty and the others, then let them go their separate ways. As for me, I had already decided to head to Mount Longhu and Mount Lao to give a try. Before I left, I told Bai Ling to take good care of the children that were previously sent in. Before I returned, the people of the Sorcerer Tribe weren't to leave the Medicine King Valley. They were to stay within the valley to prevent the monster race from invading. After making the detailed arrangements, I left the valley with the fatty and the rest. After saying goodbye, we headed in different directions. Mount Longhu was the crux of this trip. Therefore, I didn't need to think and chose Mount Longhu as my first stop. As there was no one else to take care of, I flew at full speed. At dawn the next day, I arrived at the foot of Mount Longhu. At this moment, Mount Longhu was already closed. I searched for a long time at the foot of the mountain, but I couldn't find the way to enter. I also didn't see anyone entering or leaving. I wanted to force my way in, but with the habits of those cow noses, they would definitely cause trouble. After thinking for a moment, I suddenly thought of Lu Ruxu. I called him out of the Shangliu pouch and asked him if he had any way to contact Mount Longhu. When the world changed, Lu Ruxu was in the Shangliu pouch and didn't know what was happening outside. When he heard my question, he was shocked. When he saw that he was at the foot of Mount Longhu, he was even more shocked. He repeatedly asked me why I had come to Mount Longhu. After I told him everything that had happened, Lu Ruxu finally understood. However, his expression was even more shocked than before. After a long time, he finally digested the changes in the world. He told me that he really had a way to contact the people of Mount Longhu. Finally, there was good news. I nodded and asked him to contact me immediately. After receiving the order, Lu Ruxu held his breath and chanted a long string of strange syllables. After he finished chanting, he turned to me and said, "This is the secret technique of Mount Longhu. I have already sent it to a senior brother I knew in the past. When he receives it, he will come here." His words surprised me. He was a person over 100 years old, but he still had an old acquaintance in Mount Longhu. Judging from his age, his cultivation base wasn't low. He should be someone who could talk to him. This would be much more convenient. While I was thinking, a figure in Taoist robes dashed down from the mountain. A moment later, he arrived in front of us. His eyes swept over me and fixed on Lu Ruxu. However, he didn't say anything. Lu Ruxu smiled and cupped his hands. "Thank you, senior brother." Hearing this, the Taoist surnamed Xie reacted and said, "Junior brother, it's really you. Where have you been all these years? Why do you still look the same? Something's not right." Lu Ruxu's identity should be a taboo in Mount Longhu, so the Taoist surnamed Xie shouldn't know about what had happened. However, as soon as the words left his mouth, he found that something was wrong and his expression changed. Lu Ruxu smiled and cupped her hands. "What happened in the past is in the past. Let's not talk about it. I am now a remnant soul. I have come because my Lord has an important matter to discuss with Taoist Celestial Master." "Lord?" Hearing this, the Taoist surged with anger and turned around. After seeing me clearly, he was startled. "It's you?" Chapter 889. The Taoists of Mount Longhu had always been arrogant, but this man in front of me was very courteous. Furthermore, he looked somewhat familiar. He must have been present when a mountain and sea realm had opened, which was why I recognized him. I took the liberty of coming here today to discuss an important matter with the Heavenly Master. "Please, Taoist sir, tell me about it." Seeing his amiable attitude, I humbled myself and clasped my hands in greeting. When the Taoist saw me salute him, his expression flickered with fear. "The Heavenly Master isn't in the sect right now. However, since you're here, Mr. Zhou, you might as well discuss matters with us fellow brothers and sisters." I had long since guessed that Celestial Master Zhang wasn't in Mount Longhu. After all, after the mountain and sea realm opened, the matter of ascension to immortal ascension would become even more important. However, the Taoist priest's next word surprised me. In the past, when I had interacted with Mount Longhu, they had never been so easy to talk to. Most of the time, they were arrogant and didn't care about anyone else. But now, not only was this Taoist priest very polite to me, he even agreed to my requests. It was strange. Although I was curious, I didn't say anything. The Taoist priest thought that I didn't understand, so he smiled and explained that although Celestial Master Zhang was the leader of Mount Longhu, he was always elusive. Because of that, the various miscellaneous matters of Mount Longhu were handled by the elders, and there was no need to report them to the Heavenly Master. The Heavenly Master had left Mount Longhu and specifically told me that he wouldn't be back for a while. Therefore, I didn't need to worry. No matter what happened, the elders would be able to make decisions. After listening to his explanation, I nodded. From his polite and respectful attitude, I could vaguely understand why Mount Longhu's attitude toward me had changed. First of all, I have a cultivation base in the Ascension realm. Other than the eccentrics who are half a step into the Sunset realm, there are very few people in the world who have a cultivation base similar to mine. Second of all, when a mountain and sea realm was opened, I assumed a similar role as Heavenly Master Nangong and Celestial Master Zhang. After witnessing all that, the Taoists from Mount Longhu came to view me as someone of a similar status. In fact, in the past, there had been many conflicts with Mount Longhu because of their arrogance. For example, there had been Chen Yangting, and then there had been the Taoists. Ultimately, there is no conflict of interest between us. With these thoughts in my mind, I followed the Taoist priest to the mountain gate. Lu Ruxu flew back to Xiang Lu's pouch. According to him, besides the Taoist priest who led the way, most people in Mount Longhu regarded him as their enemy. It would be better if he didn't show himself to avoid spoiling my plans. After entering the mountain gate, he walked all the way to the Grand Purity Palace. Now, outside the mountain, it was hell on earth. However, within the mountain, the Taoists were teaching and cultivating. Everything was the same. The contrast between the inside and outside of the mountain was huge. I sighed with emotion. Mount Longhu was the leader of the Taoist sects in this world. It was impossible for them not to have any feelings for their country. I asked Taoist Prisia if he knew anything about the outside world. Hearing my question, the man's expression didn't change in the slightest. He only muttered, "Although Mount Longhu is established in the mortal world, it has never cared about worldly affairs. I really don't know much about the matters outside the mountain." His words were obviously an act of ignorance. Just as I was about to ask again, he stopped in his tracks and pointed, saying, "Mr. Zhou, we've arrived at the Shanqing Palace. Allow me to report to Senior Brother first. Please wait a moment." With that, he saluted me again and quickly walked toward the palace gate. I had no choice but to give up and wait in place. After a short while, a Taoist child ran out of the palace and bowed in front of me. "Mr. Zhou, the Grand Elder invites you." After entering the Grand Purity Palace, I saw several Taoist priests in plain robes sitting in the front hall. They were all elderly people. These Taoists looked familiar. When a mountain and sea realm had opened, they had all been present. I had met them once. When I entered, the Taoists all stood up and saluted me with cupped hands. It was clear that, like Taoist Prisia, their attitude toward me had changed greatly. In any case, their goodwill would definitely be of great help to my trip. I also saluted them with cupped hands and politely greeted them for a while before sitting down. After sitting down, I didn't bother with pleasantries and got straight to the point. I asked them if they knew about the great changes that had occurred in the world. Great changes in the world? The Grand Elder, who was sitting at the front, had a puzzled look on his face. After a moment of silence, he said, "Mr. Zhou, what do you mean by great changes in the world? Could it be the calamity that happened when the longevity gate opened?" When I saw their puzzled expressions, I thought they were playing dumb. But when he mentioned the calamity, I was puzzled. Could it be that they really didn't know about the terrible situation that the world was in? Seeing my frown, the Grand Elder seemed to understand something. He explained, "Mr. Zhou, you may not know this, but after the matter with the immortal realm, we obeyed the Heavenly Master's decree and returned to Mount Longhu. We stayed in seclusion and saw the calamity on our way back. Although the calamity had something to do with our Mount Longhu, disaster relief was not our specialty. Furthermore, the Heavenly Master had decreed that we didn't participate in the disaster relief, nor did we leave the sect afterward. Mr. Zhou, what exactly are the great changes that have occurred in the world? Please explain." After hearing his words, my eyes went wide. It turned out that the people of Mount Longhu still thought that the opening of the mountain and sea realm had only brought about some calamity, and they still wanted to talk about disaster relief. Dumbfounded, I explained in detail the true effects of the opening of the mountain and sea realm to everyone. After listening to my story, all the Taoist elders were dumbstruck. The Grand Elder, who was sitting closest to me, dropped his horsetail whisk to the ground. How could this be? How could this be? When I first found out about this, I was even more shocked than they were, so I could understand what they were thinking. That was why I didn't rush them and just quietly waited for them to digest the news. After a full quarter of an hour, the Grand Elder seemed to regain his composure. His face grew solemn, and he asked me cautiously, "Mr. Zhou, are you telling the truth? I'm not questioning you, but you must know that this is a serious matter, and there is no room for falsehood." I sighed. I saw all of this with my own eyes during my travels. Besides, if it weren't for this great change, I wouldn't have come to Mount Longhu. The Grand Elder nodded, as if accepting my words. He then asked, "Mr. Zhou, did you come here for this matter?" I nodded. "That's right. I came here today to represent the shaman tribe, as well as many others in the cultivation world who are willing to take responsibility. I would like to ask Mount Longhu to join us in exterminating the demonic beasts and saving the world." When I mentioned the shaman tribe, The Taoists of Mount Longhu all had strange expressions on their faces. Clearly, they hadn't considered joining forces. However, what I had just said had a huge impact on them, so no one immediately objected. After a long moment of silence, the Grand Elder spoke. He said that this was a serious matter and that they needed to consider it. Seeing that his tone was wavering, I wanted to strike the iron while it was hot. I wanted to settle this matter while they were still immersed in the shock of the great change in the human world. No matter what, even if Mount Longhu didn't put in any effort, as long as they showed their golden signboard, they would be able to attract many people to join in. As I thought about this, I earnestly tried to persuade them. I said that the human race had already reached the point of life and death, and that the battle of the shaman tribe was no longer important. I hoped that they would look at the big picture and not care about the previous grudges. Perhaps it was because of my urging, the Grand Elder hesitated and didn't say anything. On the contrary, a slightly younger black-robed elder behind him grew impatient. He raised his hand and slammed the table. Our Mount Longhu is the leader of the Taoist sections. The Grand Elder has his own way of doing things. Don't try to bewitch or force us. I frowned when I heard this. This person was ranked at the bottom of the group of elders. With my current status, even the Great Elder of Mount Longhu had to greet me courteously. This person didn't know any better and still acted as if he didn't care about anyone. Without waiting for me to speak, the Grand Elder stopped him with a stern voice. He looked slightly embarrassed. My junior brother's temper has always been like this. I hope Mr. Zhou can be magnanimous. Naturally, I didn't care about this person. However, hearing that the Grand Elder had condescended to apologize to me, the person became angry again. His Taoist aura faintly appeared on his body, and he looked as if he didn't mind fighting me. This person only had a yang spirit cultivation base, so I naturally didn't care about him. However, before he actually attacked, the Grand Elder swung his horsetail whisk, and it turned into a cage that directly trapped the person inside. Immediately after, he coldly shouted, "Fifth brother, don't be too presumptuous. Mr. Zhou is our Mount Longhu's distinguished guest, and he has a high cultivation base. Don't embarrass yourself in front of Mr. Zhou with your cheap tricks. Go and reflect on yourself." After saying that, he didn't care about the person's struggle and swung his hand again. The horsetail whisk turned into a cage, and the Taoist directly left the front hall, disappearing without a trace. I raised my head and glanced at the other Taoists present. At this moment, their expressions were quite puzzled. Obviously, they didn't agree with the Grand Elder's way of handling things. Fortunately, the Grand Elder was quite understanding. Otherwise, this conversation would have been impossible to continue. For a moment, the hall was quiet. After a moment of silence, the Grand Elder made the final decision. He said to me, "At present, the living beings in the human world are in misery and suffering. As cultivators, we are naturally duty-bound. However, this matter, after all, involves more than 1,000 people of Mount Longhu, so I can't make a decision on my own. Mr. Zhou, please wait for a moment. Allow me to report this matter to the Celestial Master, and then make a decision." Although Celestial Master Zhang wasn't on the mountain, they naturally had a way to contact him. At this time, it was normal for them to make such a decision. I thought about it for a moment. This time, I could only do my best and leave it to fate. The current situation, to be honest, was already very good. Therefore, I nodded and left everything to Celestial Master Zhang to make the decision. After confirming, the Grand Elder led everyone into the inner hall and asked me to wait here. Chapter 890. After hearing the Great Elder's words, I heaved a huge sigh of relief. My worried heart was finally at ease for the time being. To be honest, I wasn't confident in my plan to persuade the Buddhist, Taoist, and mystic sects, especially Mount Longhu, which I had a grudge against. I had already mentally prepared myself to be rejected this time. It was a blessing from the heavens to have this result. In contrast to my sigh of relief, the other elders behind the Great Elder all had unhappy expressions. However, With the Celestial Master's decree, they had nothing to say. After conveying the Celestial Master's decree, the Great Elder raised the horsetail whisk in his hand and smiled at me. I'll have to ask Mr. Zhou to tell us what we should do next. His attitude was very humble. He had previously said that the Celestial Master's residence would be under my command. However, I obviously wouldn't take his words seriously. I hastily waved my hand and said that I wouldn't dare. While exchanging pleasantries, I was also thinking that the Celestial Master's residence naturally wouldn't trust me. Thus, I couldn't rashly arrange for them to do anything. Even if they agreed, I reckoned that they would only obey on the surface but oppose on the inside. It wouldn't be of much use. The current plan would be to temporarily use Mount Longhu as a signboard according to what I had thought before I came. With that in mind, I smiled and said, "This matter isn't urgent. Currently, the human race is scattered. We still need the various powers to gather before we can make a decision. I'll take the liberty of leaving my contact information. As for the specifics, we'll discuss it in detail after we contact each other." The Great Elder was indeed a reasonable person. He also knew that everything was still uncertain. After hearing what I said, he only smiled and exchanged contact talismans with me before asking me about the next step of the plan. This naturally wasn't something that couldn't be said. During this trip, I originally planned to persuade Mount Longhu and Mount Lao. Since the trip to Mount Longhu was successful, I would need to make a trip to Mount Lao. After hearing my plan, the Great Elder nodded and praised. Mount Lao can be considered one of the ancestral halls of Taoism. It is indeed necessary to make a trip there. Since that's the case, I'll wait for Mr. Zhou's news. The Great Elder's words had the intention of sending me off. I didn't intend to stay any longer, so I bid farewell and left the mountain. Before leaving, I asked Lu Ruxu if she had any unfinished business. She could take advantage of this trip to Mount Longhu to take care of it. However, Lu Ruxu told me that he and Mount Longhu didn't owe each other anything during his lifetime. He didn't have any unfulfilled wishes. Seeing him like that, I didn't say anything. After descending the mountain, I headed directly to Mount Lao. Mount Longhu and Mount Lao were quite far apart. Even with my current cultivation, it took me more than a day to reach the foot of Mount Lao. It was different from Mount Longhu. Previously, when I went to Mount Longhu, I was actually very worried. After all, Celestial Master Zhang's cultivation wasn't ordinary, and he had an old grudge against me. It was hard to say what would happen when we met. But on Mount Lao's side, there wasn't anyone with Celestial Master Zhang's cultivation. Although I couldn't defeat the sect master of Mount Lao, I was confident that I could deal with him. Moreover, Mount Lao owed me a favor, so I wasn't worried. After arriving at Mount Lao, I directly went up the mountain. At this moment, Mount Lao was also closed. However, I had been here not long ago and was quite familiar with the mountain gate, so I headed there directly. I was prepared to make some noise in front of the mountain gate to call for the gate's entrance. However, before I reached the mountain gate, I felt a strange aura. Apart from the pervasive spiritual energy and ancient wild energy, there was also a very thick presence of demonic energy. I was bewildered. Could it be that the demonic race had come to Mount Lao? I didn't think too much and hastened my pace. When I got close to the mountain gate, I could even smell the thick scent of blood in the air. My heart sank. Originally, Mount Lao didn't have much of a relationship with me. But this time, Mount Lao was an important force in the alliance of all the cultivators in the world. If the demonic race launched a sneak attack, it would be extremely disadvantageous to the great cause of killing the demonic race. As I was thinking, I arrived at the mountain gate. Just as I had imagined, the mountain gate was wide open and there was no one guarding it. Thus, I directly rushed in and flew toward the Supreme Purity Palace. Soon, I arrived at the Supreme Purity Palace. The first thing I saw was a blood stain in the courtyard, but there was no one around. After using my spiritual sense to search, I found a group of Taoist priests lying on the ground in a secret location in the Supreme Purity Palace, panting heavily. After hurrying over, the Taoists discovered that someone had come and immediately assumed a posture of fighting with their lives on the line. After seeing that it was me, they heaved a sigh of relief, struggled to get up, and came to greet me. The person walking in front was Lu Zongxing, whom I had dealt with last time. When he arrived in front of me, there was a trace of doubt on his face. He weakly asked, "Mr. Zhou, why are you here?" In the current situation, I naturally didn't have the time to tell him why I had come. Rather, I anxiously asked him, "Elder Lu, what happened to Mount Lao? Why is it like this?" Hearing my question, Lu Zongqing's face was immediately covered with a layer of worry, mixed with anger. He sighed and answered, "Not long ago, a group of demonic race suddenly launched a sneak attack. We were no match for them, and in the end, the Nuwa stone of the sect master was forcibly taken away. We don't know if he's alive or dead." The other disciples also suffered heavy casualties. We were worried that the demonic race would attack again, so we organized the others to temporarily hide. I already guessed that the demonic race would attack, but I didn't expect that the demonic race would steal the Nuwa stone of the sect master of Mount Lao. The sect master was a person who had achieved the Yang spirit ascension. To be able to steal the Nuwa stone from him and cause heavy casualties to Mount Lao, the demonic race's strength was evident. Last time, when I was looking for Wang Li, I met some demonic race members who had achieved the Yang spirit ascension. However, compared to the group of demonic race members Lu Zongxing was flying in the sky, their strength was obviously much lower. After explaining the situation, Lu Zongxing told me that the Nuwa stone was the sect master's life-saving treasure. After it was stolen by the demonic race, the sect master ignored his internal injuries and chased after them. It had been more than an hour since then, and I didn't know if he was still alive or not. He sounded worried, but I didn't care. When the mountain and sea realm opened, Nangong had told me that even if he died after achieving the Yang spirit ascension, he could rely on the power of the Yang spirit to survive for several months. Even if the Nuwa stone was taken away, the sect master of Mount Lao wouldn't have to worry about his life. However, I was quite confused about this matter. The 10 great divine tools had all recognized their masters. If one wasn't their master, they wouldn't be able to display their power. What was the point of the demonic race stealing the Nuwa stone? Or did they have some secret technique that I didn't know about that allowed them to change their masters? I didn't have time to think about these questions. I asked Lu Zongxing if he knew the demonic race member who had attacked first. Lu Zongxing shook his head. Although there were several demonic race members here, there was only one who attacked. I've never seen him before, but I speculate that he was most likely a greater demon from the mountain and sea realm. His speculation should be correct. The human world had just undergone great changes, and the new demonic race members had just developed intelligence. It was unlikely that they would be so scheming as to steal the Nuwa stone. Therefore, there was no doubt that it was a greater demon from the mountain and sea realm. Although the Nuwa stone had other uses, such as increasing one's cultivation base, its greatest use was to resurrect a certain life form. If humans could do it, then the demonic race could do it too. Could it be that the greater demon had stolen the Nuwa stone to resurrect someone, or perhaps some other greater demon? If that was the case, then it was terrifying. The greater demon who had come to steal the Nuwa stone had at least a breakthrough realm cultivation base. If it was willing to risk its life to do such a thing, then it must be an even more terrifying existence. Perhaps it was a Dawn realm demon. I was very worried, but I didn't say anything. After all, this was only my speculation, and I didn't have any proof. It would be better to wait for the Laozan Mountain sect leader to come back and see if he had found any clues. With that in mind, I put the matter aside for the time being. The Laozan Mountain sect leader had been gone for an hour, and I didn't know where to go to pursue him. Therefore, I comforted Lu Zongxing and asked him to come with me to check on the injuries of the people from Laozan Mountain. Although I had some friendship with Laozan Mountain, it wasn't very reliable. Furthermore, in the mountain and sea realm, I had a conflict with a Laozan Mountain sect leader over the matter of Han Wennan. This was a good opportunity for me to establish good karma with him, which would be of great help in my future lobbying efforts. Of course, this was only one of my considerations. Now that we were facing a powerful enemy, the human race should be united. Even if I didn't have such a goal, I wouldn't stand by and watch them die. Seeing my actions, Lu Zongxing was moved. He saluted me and said, "Laozhan Mountain will remember Mr. Zhou's kindness." This was my original goal, so I didn't say anything after he thanked me. I waved my hand and went to the people from Laozhan Mountain. Those people's injuries were very serious. If I hadn't come here today, I'm afraid most of them would have died. Although I wasn't a doctor, I had the spiritual power in my body that could heal injuries, so treating their injuries was a piece of cake. After several hours of treatment, most of them had recovered. I was physically and mentally exhausted. After I was done, I sat cross-legged and adjusted my breathing for a long time before I could recover. When I woke up, the survivors of Laozhan Mountain were standing in front of me. When they saw me open my eyes, they immediately bowed to express their gratitude. Although I had my own motives, I was indeed their benefactor, so I calmly accepted their salute. After they saluted me, I was about to say something when a shadow flashed outside the house. Before I could react, I heard a thud as if something heavy had fallen. The others didn't know what had happened, so they followed me out of the house to check. Then, they saw a man covered in blood lying in the flower garden in the courtyard. I didn't recognize him at first, but the Taoist priests of Laozhan Mountain shouted the sect master's name and hurried to check. When I arrived, they had already turned the sect master over. He was unconscious, and the flesh on his chest was torn. There wasn't a single part of his body that wasn't damaged. He was still breathing. Seeing the sect master in this state, the joy on the faces of the Laozhan Mountain Taoists disappeared. They looked panicked and didn't know what to do. Seeing this, I hurried forward and placed my hand on the sect master's body to check his injuries. Just like what I saw on the surface, the sect master's life palace was seriously damaged. Moreover, he didn't have a wisp of Tao energy in his body. His heavenly veins couldn't even move. He could only rely on the power of the yang spirit in his life palace to support his breathing. Moreover, his yang spirit was severely damaged. If he didn't receive treatment soon, he wouldn't be able to hold on for long, even with his cultivation base. The situation was critical, and the morale of the Laozhan Mountain Taoists was low. I didn't tell them the truth and just asked them to bring the sect master back to the Supreme Purity Palace. Since I was the one who treated everyone's injuries, they naturally trusted me. They followed my instructions and carried the sect master inside, placing him on a pile of cushions. Chapter 891. Hearing that the headmaster's situation wasn't optimistic, the elders of Mount Lao didn't panic. After all, they were mentally prepared after the Nuwa stone was stolen. Lu Zongxing was the first to step forward. He bowed to me and said, "Mr. Zhou, please help to save my master. If I could save him, I would have done so without them even asking. However, the situation was complicated. I could save the headmaster's injuries, but I couldn't do anything about his damaged Fate Palace." After explaining the situation, the elders looked at each other and asked if there was a way to repair his Fate Palace. I wasn't a doctor, and it was the first time I had seen a Fate Palace damaged. How could I have a way to save him? Hearing my answer, the elders looked dispirited. But then, Lu Zongxing suddenly lifted his head and told me that he had seen a record of this situation in the library of Mount Lao. My eyes brightened after hearing his words. Although Mount Lao wasn't as strong as Mount Longhu, it had several thousand years of Taoist heritage. It must be extraordinary for it to be able to stand until now. I immediately asked the other elders to search the library, leaving only Lu Zongxing behind. He wanted to go with me, but I stopped him. "Your senior brothers will be at ease if you stay here." Lu Zongxing was almost 50 years old, so he understood what I meant. However, he was embarrassed and couldn't maintain his composure. I waved my hand and said with a smile, "It's okay. After all, I broke into the mountain gate last time and had an argument with your master. It's normal for them to hold a grudge against me. At this moment, your master is seriously injured. If it were me, I would also be worried about handing him over to an outsider." He cupped his hands at me and apologized. "Mr. Zhou is magnanimous. My senior brothers and junior brothers are gauging the heart of a gentleman with the yardstick of a villain." I waved my hand and didn't linger on this topic. Instead, I gestured for him to help the headmaster's body up. I didn't know how long it would take for the others to find the information they wanted. Since the life palace of Mount Lao's sect master was damaged, he couldn't use his yang god power to protect his body. After a long time, his body would naturally weaken. Even if his fate palace was repaired, his body would be damaged. So, I have to protect his body first. After Lu Zongqing supported the headmaster's body, I sat down cross-legged and adjusted my breathing. I sent this strange spiritual power into the headmaster's body to repair his damaged meridians. About a quarter of an hour later, his bodily functions gradually recovered, and the circulatory cycle revolution continued. Although there are other injuries, as long as he can repair his fate palace, he can easily recover by himself. There is no need for me to take care of all of them. After everything was done, I saw that the others had yet to return, but I didn't immediately stop. Instead, I began to ponder. Since the strange spirit power in my body could heal injuries, would it also have an effect on my fate palaces? Theoretically speaking, it seemed possible, so I decided to take advantage of this opportunity to experiment. Of course, the fate palace was different, so I didn't tell Lu Zongqing, who was next to me. Instead, I silently sent my spiritual power into the sect leader's fate palace. The fate palace was not only the place where the yang spirit resided, but it was also the foundation of life. Thus, I focused my mind to the extreme and carefully controlled the spiritual power. I was afraid that if I wasn't careful, I would make the Laozhan sect leader situation even worse. However, I didn't expect that the spiritual energy that I had been carefully controlling would instantly break free of my control after reaching his life palace and head straight for the sect master's yang spirit. In the next second, the sect leader's yang spirit, which was originally extremely depressed, suddenly became excited and constantly trembled. However, the spiritual power didn't enter the yang spirit's body, but quickly circled around it. Every time it circled around, the trembling yang spirit recovered a bit. After dozens of seconds, the originally shriveled yang spirit completely swelled up. It looked like it had recovered at least 50%. However, at this time, the spiritual power seemed to have run out and stopped circling. After a while, it disappeared from the fate palace. Although the yang spirit had only recovered by 50%, it could already exert its effects. Not long after, the sect leader's broken fate palace began to repair itself. Not long after, it had recovered by more than half. I was extremely shocked. Originally, I was just trying it out casually. I didn't expect that the spiritual power would not only have an effect, but that the effect was almost heaven-defying. At this time, I became more and more curious about the spiritual power in my body. The description of the death scripture did not mention this strange spiritual power. I originally speculated that it was naturally obtained after the ascension, and that it was one of the destiny divine abilities of the ascension. However, this speculation was overturned. Other ascension practitioners did not have the ability to easily repair their fate palaces, so this spiritual power was definitely not ordinary. It was most likely related to my strange bloodline. As he was thinking, the few elders who had left earlier hurriedly returned. Their faces were filled with worry. Seeing this, Lu Zongqing's face also darkened. Without waiting for me to speak, he took the initiative to ask if they had found a solution. The elders sighed together. The person walking at the front replied, "We found a method recorded in the ancient records. However, this method is not something that can be done by ordinary people. It's not much different from not having it at all." Lu Zongqing frowned. He didn't understand, so he continued to ask what the method was. The elders told Lu Zongqing, "According to the ancient records of Mount Lao, if you want to repair your fate palace, you need the power of a god. At this time, the Laozhan sect master is fine. He only needs to rest and wait for his yang spirit to gradually recover. Once his fate palace is repaired, he will wake up, and I won't need to take care of him anymore." Hearing their words, my interest was piqued. I put the Laozhan sect master down, then stood up, cupped my hands, and asked the elders where they had found this information in the ancient records. When the elders saw me cupping my hands, they hurriedly returned the greeting, then handed the ancient book to me. "Mr. Zhou, this is it." I took it and looked at it. It was a yellow, thread-bound booklet named Strange Records. It recorded many unorthodox knowledge of the cultivation world, and the last part mentioned the Fate Palace. The original words were, "If the Fate Palace is damaged, it will lead to death. Only the power of a god can save it." There were many explanations for the power of a god, but the book also mentioned it in other places, so I was sure that it was a method of immortals. Although the mountain and sea realm had opened, there had been no news of immortals appearing. Therefore, after reading this record, not only were they not happy, they were even more depressed. At the same time, my mood was extremely strange. According to the ancient records, the strange spiritual power in my body was able to repair the Laozhan sect master's Fate Palace. It should be the power of a god, and in other words, the method of an immortal. However, I only have a Rising Dawn cultivation base, and I'm still far from Rising Dawn Ascension. How could I have this kind of power? Moreover, I've tried many times, but this power can only be used to heal injuries. It can't be used to fight enemies. It's clearly far from the so-called immortal methods. Although I still had my suspicions, there was one thing I could confirm. This power wasn't something I had obtained through cultivation, but rather something that had awakened in my bloodline. I didn't know if it was left behind by Emperor Ku or Monster Emperor Jun. In any case, I had some understanding of this strange power, so this trip wasn't in vain. As for the Laozhan sect elders, I naturally wouldn't tell them the truth. An ordinary man's wealth is his own ruin. This strange power far exceeded my current cultivation base. If word of this got out, people like Celestial Master Zhang and President Li, who wanted to ascend, would do anything to obtain this power from me and use it to study the immortal Tao. After thinking about it for a moment, I casually made up a story and returned the book to the Laozhan sect elders. The power of a god can't be found, but I just took the risk to investigate the sect master's Fate Palace. I discovered that before the sect master passed out, he had left behind some power in his Yang divinity. After I activated that power, his Yang divinity gradually awakened. Now, as long as I can increase the power of his Yang divinity, he can repair his Fate Palace on his own. The situation isn't as bad as I thought. As soon as I said this, everyone was stunned at first, but they immediately became happy. They all bowed to me and said, "Thank you, Mr. Zhou. If we can save the sect master this time, our Laozhan sect will remember Mr. Zhou's great kindness." I didn't care about their beautiful words and estimated the time it would take for the Laozhan sect master to repair his Fate Palace. Then, I told everyone that it would take several days to strengthen the Yang divinity. I needed absolute peace during these days, so I asked them to protect me and guard against the monsters. The elders, who previously held a grudge against me, no longer had any disagreements and immediately nodded in agreement. They then asked me if I had any other requests. After knowing that I had no other requests, they immediately withdrew from the palace gates and stood guard outside. What I said just now was just to deal with them. In fact, I didn't need to do anything about the Laozhan sect master. I just needed to wait for him to wake up. The Fate Palace and the Yang divinity were the most important things in a cultivator's life. External stimulation was far less effective than self-recovery, so I didn't need to do anything. As for why I asked them to leave, the Laozhan sect master needed several days to wake up, and I couldn't leave during this time, so I could only stay here. Secondly, after what had just happened, I was extremely curious about the strange spirit power in my body. I couldn't wait to study it. After everyone left, I set up a witchcraft barrier around us just in case. Then, I tried to use the strange spirit power in my body to carefully observe and study it. In the blink of an eye, several days had passed. Just as I had instructed, no one had come to disturb me during these past few days. However, even after meticulously studying it, I was still unable to grasp the mysteries of this spiritual power. It should be because my cultivation was too low. I was mentally prepared for this, so I wasn't too disappointed. At noon on the fourth day, the sleeping Laozhan sect master finally moved. He opened his eyes and sat up on the bed. Chapter 892. As the saying goes, you know your own affairs best. I could easily deceive others, but the Laozon Mountain sect master must have known about his own situation when he was injured. That's why he asked me this question. Although I knew this, my expression didn't change. I just smiled and nodded. The Laozon Mountain sect master was surprised and looked at me suspiciously. After a while, he said, "Taoist Zhou, you're really a genius. I won't dare to forget your life-saving grace." I smiled and waved my hand. "Sect master, you're exaggerating. We need to work together to deal with the monster race." Seeing that I was trying to change the topic, the Laozon Mountain sect master didn't pursue the matter. He just smiled at me and asked me about the current situation of Laozon Mountain. I briefly explained the situation of Laozon Mountain. Then, I removed the witchcraft energy barrier and summoned the Laozon Mountain sect elders who were guarding outside. After everyone entered the room and saw that the sect master had woken up, they were excited. A few of them rushed forward and surrounded the sect master. They knelt down and shouted, "Greetings, sect master!" Their words were filled with joy. After bowing to the sect leader, they hurriedly turned to bow to me, thanking me for saving them. I didn't dare to be careless and hurriedly stopped their actions. I said, "You are all older than me. This is Kid Jiesha." Seeing me like this, they didn't insist. Lu Zongqing took a step forward and sincerely said, "Mr. Zhou, Laozon Mountain will never forget your kindness. If there's anything you need in the future, please don't hesitate to ask." At this moment, the Laozon Mountain sect leader had woken up. Lu Zongqing's words seemed like he was overstepping his authority. However, I came here to persuade them. Hearing him say that, I took the opportunity and smiled. Elder Lu is being too serious. However, I do have a matter that I need the help of the senior brothers from Laozon. Hearing this, everyone was stunned. Lu Zongqing was silent for a while before continuing, "I don't know what it is. Mr. Zhou, please speak your mind." I took advantage of this opportunity to explain the purpose of my visit. I even emphasized that Mount Longhu had agreed to cooperate with us. Due to the previous conflict with the monster race, after hearing what I said, everyone from Mount Lao was indignant. It was obvious that they hated the monster race. However, with the Laozon sect leader present, they couldn't make a decision on this matter. Thus, they didn't say anything and turned to look at the Laozon sect leader, waiting for his decision. At this moment, the Laozon sect master fell silent. After a moment, he said, "Nowadays, the demon race is rampaging, causing the people to be plunged into misery and suffering. As a Taoist holy land, Mount Lao naturally wouldn't sit idly by. Even if fellow Taoist Zhou hadn't come, this old man had originally planned to organize the sect's disciples to subdue the demons. However, I didn't expect the demons to launch a sneak attack in advance, which messed up the plan. This old man will naturally take a positive attitude towards this matter." His words were quite awe-inspiring. However, when I glanced at the other Laozon sect elders, I saw that they were astonished. It was obvious that the Laozon sect master had never mentioned the so-called subduing demons. Now that he had said it without thinking, the others couldn't keep up with him. Of course, I naturally wouldn't pursue whether or not he was speaking without thinking. After getting an affirmative answer, I heaved a sigh of relief. No matter what, the purpose of this trip had finally been achieved. After confirming this matter, I turned to ask the Laozon sect master about the cultivation level of the monster race that had injured him and the purpose of stealing the Nuwa stone. This matter was very important. I had some guesses before, but I wasn't sure. After the Laozon sect master woke up, I wanted to ask him. However, the matter of joining hands to resist the demons was more important, so I delayed it until now. Hearing my question, the sect master's face darkened. It was obvious that he hated this matter to the extreme. After a while, he calmed down a little and said, "That monster race was very mysterious. I had never heard of the cultivation technique he used. Not only was I no match for him, but even the Laozon sect's great formation couldn't do anything to him. While facing the Laozon sect's great formation, not only did he break the formation, but he also wounded many disciples of Laozon sect. He stole my Nuwa stone and left. Based on this, his cultivation base is at least at the late stage of the Ascension realm, maybe even half a step into the Cloud Ascension realm. As for his purpose, the Nuwa stone is a divine weapon. It's normal that the monster race covets it. The main point of his words was still to speculate on the monster race's cultivation, but I was more concerned about his motive. Hearing this, I couldn't help but frown. Just as I was about to voice out my conjecture, the words reached the tip of my tongue, but I stopped. At this moment, it wasn't really meaningful to guess his purpose. After all, the Nuwa stone had been lost, and there was no way to find it. At this moment, it was more important to discuss the cooperation. As for my previous worries, I could only wait for the news later. Thus, I didn't dwell on this matter. I wanted to discuss the details of the cooperation with the Laozon sect's headmaster. However, he didn't seem to care. He just sighed and said, "Let me and Lu Zongqing discuss it among ourselves." Now that he had lost the Nuwa stone, he didn't even know whether he could save his life or not. He didn't have the energy to care about other things. After listening to him, I immediately understood that the Laozon sect's headmaster wanted to find the immortal fate to survive in the midst of death. Just as he had said, the Nuwa stone was lost. Although I had saved him, his body had lost its vitality. He only had a few months left to live. At this moment, we didn't know the identity of the pirate, and we couldn't track him down. It was impossible to take back the Nuwa stone. The only way to survive was to find the immortal fate. Normally, after the Yang Spirit Ascension realm, it was possible to ascend. However, the higher one's cultivation base was, the higher the chance of success would be. With the Laozon sect's headmaster's cultivation base at the early stage of the Ascension realm, even if he found the immortal fate, the chance of success would be very low. However, he was trying to survive in the midst of death. No matter how small the chance was, he had to try. After understanding what he meant, I expressed my understanding. In such a situation, anyone would choose to save their own life first. After telling me this, he stood up and swept his gaze across the Laozon elders. From today onwards, the position of the sect master will be passed to Lu Zongqing. You will have to work with Taoist Zhou to subdue the demons and devils. This time, I'm going to search for the immortal fate. If I find something, I will return. If I don't have the power to reverse the situation, you must remember the teachings of the three pure ones and live up to the name of Laozon sect. After hearing this, the Laozon sect's elders all cried bitterly, but they couldn't persuade him. After a while, they knelt down and nodded in agreement. After they agreed, the Laozon sect's headmaster disappeared, leaving only a jade ring on the ground. This jade ring was the headmaster's keepsake. It contained the secret inheritance of Laozon sect. Since the Laozon sect's headmaster had passed the position to Lu Zongqing, it was reasonable for him to leave behind a keepsake. Lu Zongqing walked forward and put the jade ring in his bosom. From now on, he was officially the new headmaster. Although he wasn't the strongest among the elders, he was very dependable. Laozon sect's daily affairs had always been handled by him, and he was originally being groomed as the successor. Now that he had taken over the position of headmaster, no one had any objections. I was also quite happy. Lu Zongqing had always had a good relationship with me. Now that he was in charge of Laozon sect's affairs, the cooperation would surely progress smoothly. After they finished dealing with other matters, I began to discuss with Lu Zongqing. According to him, since Laozon sect and Longhu sect had reached an agreement with the shaman tribe, the current situation in the human world was urgent and couldn't be delayed. It was better to make arrangements as soon as possible. What he said was true. If they delayed for another day, the human world would suffer immeasurable damage. Then, I took out the sound transmission talisman and sent a message to the great elder of Longhu sect, asking him to send someone to Laozon sect to discuss the deployment. I didn't expect that the great elder of Longhu sect would reply, saying that Longhu sect had many matters to attend to and refused to come. Instead, he asked me to bring the people of Laozon sect to Longhu sect. When I heard this news, I didn't think much about it. Longhu sect had many complicated matters that required his attention, so it was true that he couldn't come here. However, after reading it carefully, I found the meaning behind it. The great elder's words were mostly to put on airs. He believed that Longhu's sect's status in the Taoist world was far above Laozhan's sect. If he were to come here, he would be lowering his status. I didn't know what to do with him, so I turned to ask Lu Zongqing if he could come with me to Longhu's sect. He seemed to have noticed something, but he didn't immediately express his opinion. Instead, he asked me if Celestial Master Zhang of Longhu's sect was there. After seeing me shake my head, he said, "I originally planned to visit Celestial Master Zhang, but it seems that it's not necessary." His words clearly showed that he didn't want to go with me. Seeing this, I felt a little angry. Now that things had come to this, it was too inappropriate for the two sects to compete with each other. Although I had this thought in my mind, I didn't show it. At this time, the two sects were my two biggest supporters. I couldn't let a small matter affect the harmony between us. I pondered for a while and decided to bring the people of Longhu's sect and Laozhan's sect back to the Medicine King Valley. The discussion would be held in the Medicine King Valley. This way, the fatty and Zhang Qianwen would be able to meet up with them. Moreover, the location was hidden, so we wouldn't have to worry about the monster race finding out. After listening to my suggestion, Lu Zongqing reluctantly nodded and agreed. Perhaps he knew that I hadn't acted out of respect for Laozhan's sect. If he still refused, it would be a little unreasonable. As such, I informed Longhu's sect about this matter. This time, the great elder of Longhu's sect confirmed it. He told me that he would go to the Medicine King Mountain tomorrow to find me. It was already midnight. I was rather anxious about this matter and didn't care about the time. I asked Lu Zongqing if he could leave with me immediately. He didn't seem to have any objections at first, but just as he was about to speak, he was stopped by his senior brothers. I heard them say, "Mr. Zhou, you must be very tired these few days. It's getting late now. Why don't you rest here for the night? It won't be too late to leave tomorrow." At first, I didn't think much of it. Just as I was about to refuse, I noticed that the senior brothers seemed to be communicating with each other. I thought about it and nodded in agreement. It seemed that Lu Zongqing's senior brothers were still a little worried about me. The Medicine King Valley was the gathering place of the witch race. The battle of the witches had already penetrated into their bones. Now that they wanted to follow me to the witch race, they naturally had their considerations. It wasn't that I couldn't understand this. Back when we were discussing the Witches' Alliance in the Medicine King Valley, the people of the witch race had the same reaction. However, since Lu Zongqing had already agreed to this matter, he definitely wouldn't go back on his word. His senior brother's actions most likely meant that they had something to tell him. In this regard, I could only let them do as they pleased. If I forcefully interfered, it would deepen their suspicions. After resting for the night on Mount Lao, Lu Zongqing and I set off on our journey back to the Medicine King Valley the next morning. On the way, I sent a message to the fatty and the others. After learning that the fatty and Zhang Qianwen had settled the matter, I didn't dare to delay any further. However, as I had expected, Su Kuan's progress was a little slow. A few days had passed, but the Su family still hadn't relented. When I sent a message to Su Kuan, he apologized profusely. I didn't care too much about it, but I told him about the matter between Mount Longhu and Mount Lao. Perhaps it would be of help to him. Several hours later, I met the late great elder of Mount Longhu and his group at the Medicine King Mountain. After exchanging greetings, they followed me to the Medicine King Valley. Knowing that I would return today, the people of the Medicine King Valley were already waiting outside the village. After I landed, the people of the witch race knelt before me and stepped aside to let me go first. After the people of Mount Longhu and Mount Lao followed me to the meeting hall, Zhang Qianwen and the fatty arrived with their people. I had originally thought that the fatty would send Immortal Guan as his representative to discuss the matter. I hadn't expected that Immortal Guan would come in person, which surprised me. However, I heard from the fatty that Immortal Guan's visit wasn't entirely because of me. It was also because Immortal Guan had some matters to attend to during the fatty's wedding. This time, apart from discussing the matter of the alliance, he also wanted Bai Ling to change her taste of tea. No matter what, Immortal Guan's visit was a show of respect. There was no doubt about it. Chapter 893. After some polite words, there were only a few people who responded. I felt rather awkward. Although I had experienced this kind of situation many times, it was the first time that I had personally organized such a meeting. Seeing that the crowd wasn't interested in polite words, I cleared my throat and directly talked about the matter at hand. The current situation was obvious. The human race was weak and their strength was scattered. They were unable to resist the demonic beasts. This time's persuasion was to call for the great sects to work together as one. Secondly, it was to come up with a plan. It would be best if all the powers were united. That way, they could work together. After summarizing the main topic of the meeting, there was no lack of quick-witted people in the crowd. After listening, they loudly said, according to Brother Zhou's plan, we should form an alliance. This person's conclusion was correct. The current plan was for all the sects to form an alliance and bury the hatchet. They would join hands to fight against the enemy. Only then would they be able to display their greatest strength. However, this was only my personal opinion. It would depend on the opinions of Mount Longhu and Mount Lao. These two sects were the strongest powers in this meeting, so their words carried more weight. After I finished speaking, I turned to look at them to ask for their opinion. It wasn't much different from what I had expected. Since they had come here, they also had the intention of cooperating. The great elder was a man of few words. He didn't say anything and only nodded at me. Lu Zongqing also gave a definite answer after a brief discussion with the other elders. Since Mount Longhu and Mount Lao had made their positions clear, the others didn't have any objections and immediately approved the proposal to form an alliance. After the alliance was formed, the next issue was naturally to elect a leader. The purpose of forming an alliance was to gather strength. Thus, there had to be a person who could be trusted by all the sections. Otherwise, the alliance would be meaningless. In my opinion, since Celestial Teacher Zhang of Mount Longhu and the Sect Master of Mount Lao weren't here, the title of the alliance leader would naturally fall to Spiritual Master Guan. Although the strength of the divination faction couldn't compare to that of Mount Longhu and Mount Lao, it was still very famous in the cultivation world. Apart from that, he was also a sect master and was familiar with the management of a leader. He wouldn't be a loss if he took over the position of the alliance leader. As I thought about this, I voiced out my suggestion. After the crowd heard this, they did not express any opinion. However, Immortal Guan voiced out his objection. Nephew's words are incorrect. In terms of cultivation, I can't convince the masses. In terms of status, I can't compare to the fellow Taoists of Mount Longhu and Mount Lao. I'm not suitable for the position of alliance leader. Moreover, the alliance this time is the Sorcerer Tao Alliance. Be it me or the other Tao sect senior brothers, we don't have much interaction with the Sorcerer tribe. Only you, Nephew Zhou, have a cultivation base at such a young age and have the identity of the Sorcerer tribe's saint. I think the position of the alliance leader belongs to you. As soon as he finished speaking, Lu Zongqing stood up and said, Martial Uncle Guan is right. The Sorcerer Alliance was originally established by Mr. Zhou, so the position of alliance leader naturally belongs to Mr. Zhou. Everyone on Laozhan supports Mr. Zhou. These words made Laoshan's position clear. Following that, the great elder of Mount Longhu also voiced out his support. As for the Sorcerer tribe, I would have full authority to represent them. As such, there were no more objections. Everyone cupped their fists at me and said, Alliance leader. In reality, I had no intention of taking the position of alliance leader. However, what Immortal Guan said was right. Between the Sorcerer tribe and the Taoists, I was the only person that they recognized. If I didn't take the position of alliance leader, no matter who took the position, there would be people from both factions who would be dissatisfied. If there was a conflict because of this, the already loose alliance would immediately face the risk of dispersing. After bracing myself to take the position of alliance leader, I needed to brainstorm and discuss the strategy to deal with the monsters. The Sorcerer tribe had previously proposed this issue. Now that it was brought up again, the other factions didn't have much of an impression of the monsters. After thinking for a while, most of them seconded the proposal. Thus, based on the original proposal of the Sorcerer tribe, the scale of the alliance was expanded by several times. They selected a few important locations to build defense points for the human race, and the various factions would be stationed there. The purpose was the same as before. First, it was to attract more cultivators to gather there and expand their strength. Second, it was to take in refugees and provide shelter for them. After discussing the specific details, this matter was finally decided. Then, it was the specific location, the people who would be stationed there, the time for changing the guards, and other issues in the implementation process. After spending several hours to confirm these issues, I realized that I, the so-called alliance leader, had become a role similar to a mascot. I didn't need to be involved in the specific matters, and the decision was made by everyone's brain power. It didn't have much to do with me. After the specific implementation, I could only stay in the headquarters, which was the Medicine King Valley. Nominally, I was in charge of the center, but in reality, I had nothing to do. I hadn't expected this situation. Although I was a little dissatisfied, the Sorcerer Tribe and the Taoists all had the same idea. Thus, I couldn't say anything to refute. After the discussion ended, according to the previous plan, everyone got busy and started to work step by step. I was the only one who couldn't think of anything to do. Fortunately, while I was idling, the sound-transmitting talisman in Xiang Lu's bag received a message. I took it out and saw that the person who sent the message was Su Kuan, and the message only had 4 short words. "Zhou Yi, save me." Seeing these 4 words, my heart suddenly quivered. Su Kuan was obviously in trouble. I immediately sent a message back to him, but I didn't receive a response. It was obvious that the situation on his side was extremely urgent, and he couldn't reply at all. Since I couldn't get any effective information, I could only speculate on my own. I had contacted him not long ago. He should still be in the Su family at this time. According to my understanding, although the Su family wasn't considered a super metaphysical family, they were famous in the Metaphysical Association. They had a deep foundation and many cultivators above the Yang spirit realm. At this time, Su Kuan had sent me a message asking for help. It was obvious that the Su family had encountered a strong enemy and couldn't resist at all. Based on the current situation, it was very likely that they had encountered some powerful monster race. I briefly thought about this matter. Seeing that the others were busy and only I had nothing to do, I simply told the fatty about the matter. I told him to keep an eye on the situation here and to keep in touch with me at any time. Then, I prepared to leave for the Su family. The fatty looked a little hesitant. It was obvious that he didn't approve of me leaving alone. However, in the alliance, there was really no use for me. Su Kuan's situation was very urgent and couldn't be delayed. Thus, after hesitating for a moment, the fatty nodded and agreed. However, he told me to be careful. After leaving the Medicine King Valley, I flew at full speed to Jinling. The Su family was a metaphysical family that had been in Jinling for many years. Previously, Su Kuan had told me the specific address, which saved me the trouble of finding it. After several hours, I arrived in Jinling. After identifying the direction, I headed in the direction of the Su family. Just as I was approaching the Su family's house, the sound-transmitting talisman in Shang Liu's bag vibrated again. I quickly took it out to check. It was Su Kuan. He told me that the Su family had suffered many casualties. To save his life, the elders of the family had placed him in a secret chamber. The situation was very critical. The other members of the Su family were fighting with a monster race outside, ready to die. At this time, he was also seriously injured and almost couldn't mobilize his Taoist energy. After accumulating it for a long time, he sent me this message. After receiving the message, I sped up. Although I didn't have any friendship with the Su family, I admired Su Kuan very much. Secondly, saving the Su family was an opportunity to win over the metaphysical families to join the Witchcraft Alliance. In less than an hour, I arrived at the Su family's place. Even from afar, I could sense a few wisps of dense demonic qi. There weren't many monster race members that had invaded the Su family's house. There were only 5 or 6 of them, but their cultivation bases were at the Yang Spirit Complete realm, close to the Ascension realm. Chapter 894. The situation was critical, and I didn't have much time to guess. At full speed, it only took me a few seconds to enter the Sioux family's manor. The first thing I saw was a pool of blood in the courtyard. There were dozens of corpses lying on the ground. The originally beautiful manor was now a mess. It was obvious that a very dangerous battle had occurred. On the other side of the wall, there were still sounds of fighting coming from the garden. However, it was sparse and not loud. It seemed that the surviving members of the Sioux family didn't have much power to resist. I stepped on the wall and looked up. It was not much different from what I had guessed. At this moment, there were less than 10 Sioux family members standing in the garden. From their appearance, they were all old people. Against them were 5 or 6 young spirit Yao race members. Although they weren't at a disadvantage in terms of numbers, the Sioux family members were at the end of their flight. It was obvious that they wouldn't be able to hold on for much longer. My gaze lingered on the battlefield for a moment. Very quickly, I turned to look at a black-robed man standing in midair. From where he stood, it was obvious that he was the leader of the Yao beast attack on the Sioux family. Moreover, after carefully sensing him, I couldn't see through his cultivation. In this way, my previous doubts were answered. It was impossible for a few young spirit Yao beasts to attack the Sioux family. The one who had truly attacked should be the black-robed Yao race member who maintained his human appearance. Although I couldn't see through his cultivation, I wasn't too worried. After all, I had already killed a mid-stage Yao race member. If another one came, it would just be his soul under my blade. I jumped down from the wall and dashed toward the people who were fighting against each other. The remaining members of the Sioux clan were all arrows at the end of their flight. If I delayed any longer, more people would die in vain. Thus, I did not hesitate at all. After I rushed over, I produced a ball of Taoist chi in my hand and bombarded it towards the monster clan that was besieging me. Under the suppression of absolute power, the Yao beasts didn't even notice my approach. They received the attack head-on and were instantly sent flying. They vomited blood and were seriously injured. I launched this attack out of anger, so it wouldn't have been difficult for me to take their lives. However, these demonic beasts were mixed in with the Sioux clan's people. In order to avoid accidentally injuring them, under my precise control, I didn't care too much about the power of the attack, which allowed them to escape with their lives. After the monsters retreated, the members of the Sioux family all collapsed onto the ground. They looked at me with gratitude. One of the elders panted as he shouted at me, "Junior, quickly leave this place. That monster leader isn't someone you can defeat." The monster beast leader that he was talking about was obviously the black-clothed man, standing in the air. I didn't know why, but after seeing me attack, the monster beast leader didn't immediately attack. Instead, he remained in the air, separated by the black robe. I didn't know what he was thinking. I glanced at them, then retracted my gaze and smiled at the Sioux family. Many thanks for the warning from the Sioux family's elders. However, this junior has come to save the Sioux family from crisis. How can I cower? These people obviously didn't know that Sukuin had asked me for help. When they heard what I said, they immediately opened their eyes wide and looked at me suspiciously. "You? Who are you?" "This junior is Zhou Yi." I smiled and bowed as I reported my name. Hearing my name, the elders of the Sioux family were even more surprised. It took a while for them to react. The elder that reminded me seemed to have recovered some of his strength. He struggled to stand up and return my greeting. "I've long heard of Taoist Zhou's name. Today, I've finally seen your talent. You really live up to your reputation." Just as the two of us were talking, a hoarse voice suddenly sounded behind us. "You are Zhou Yi?" After being interrupted by the voice, the elder of the Sioux family immediately stopped and looked worried. My heart also tightened slightly. It wasn't that I was afraid, but the voice of the black-cloaked monster had a strange rhythm that made people feel uneasy. It was obvious that his cultivation had reached an extremely high realm. As I couldn't see through his cultivation, I could only guess. I originally thought that he was most likely in the late stages of breaking through, but after hearing his voice, I didn't dare to make a judgment. In my vigilance, I couldn't pay attention to the elders of the Sioux family. I turned to face the black-cloaked monster and replied, "I am indeed Zhou Yi. May I know who you are?" Ever since I stepped onto the path of cultivation, I had some fame in the metaphysics world. It was normal for the elders of the Sioux family to have heard of me. However, this monster leader also knew my name, which was very unusual. Hearing my question, the black-cloaked monster didn't reply. Instead, he slightly raised his head and looked at me with a sharp gaze. In an instant, my heart palpitated. This feeling was somewhat familiar. Earlier, outside the mountain and sea realm gate, when Celestial Master Zhang attacked me. Could it be that this black-cloaked monster was half a step in a breaking through? I became even more vigilant. However, after the black-cloaked monster glanced at me, he didn't do anything else. He just spoke again in his hoarse voice. Hand over the Xinyuan sword, and I can spare your life. Xinyuan sword? I couldn't help but recall the matter of the Laozhan mountain sect leader and instantly understood. This black-cloaked monster had invaded the Sioux family for the divine tool. Naturally, he knew my name because of the divine tool. Could it be that he was the monster that had stolen the Nuwa stone? If it was the same person, then this monster's scheme was truly grand. After stealing the Nuwa stone, he also wanted to steal the other divine tools. It was clear that he was preparing to take control of all 10 divine tools. I took a deep breath. Today's battle was unavoidable. If this black-cloaked monster really was half a step into breaking through, then I naturally wouldn't be a match for him. However, this was only a guess. Furthermore, the Sioux family could only rely on me. No matter what, I had to give it a try. As I was thinking, the black-cloaked monster seemed a bit impatient. He walked towards me, and as he approached, the monster energy around me grew thicker, making it hard for me to breathe. Under such pressure, I didn't have time to think. I immediately took out the Xinyuan sword and activated the sword energy, preparing to use my strongest attack. Facing such a powerful enemy, there was no room for me to test the waters. If I didn't use my strongest attack, it would be hard to say if I would have another chance to use it later. The sword cultivation technique in my body quickly circulated. Tao energy rose from my life palace. After combining with the strange spiritual power, it was sent into the Xinyuan sword. Seeing that I was about to activate the sword energy, the black-cloaked monster suddenly stopped. He frowned and looked at me. In his hoarse voice, there seemed to be a bit of shock. God's power. I was shocked. I had guessed that the strange spiritual power was the power of a god. Who knew that the black-cloaked monster would be able to see through it? At that moment, the Xinyuan sword energy had already been activated. I didn't care too much. In the next second, the Xinyuan sword floated up and quickly revolved around my body. In the blink of an eye, a wave of energy enveloped me. Under the wave of energy, the soil under my feet splashed and my body continuously sunk. After a few seconds, a large hole with a diameter of tens of meters appeared. Although the prelude to activating the Xinyuan sword's strongest attack was long, its momentum was extremely great. Seeing this, the monster race's originally calm and unruffled movements changed. It seemed to have seen the danger, and its stagnant body instantly exploded. Instead of retreating, it directly charged towards me, as if it wanted to interrupt my movements. But it was obviously too late. He had just approached me when the wave of energy generated by the Xinyuan sword energy around my body had already emitted countless rays of golden Tao energy. In the next second, the wave of energy suddenly stopped, and the Tao energy formed a golden wall in front of me. Then, there were even cracks on the golden wall. Countless small golden swords shot out from the cracks, heading straight for the black-cloaked monster. After using it several times, I was now more and more skilled in controlling the strongest attack. After the small golden swords left my body, I closely watched the movements of the black-cloaked monster. If he was really half a step into the Shaju realm, this attack naturally wouldn't be able to injure him. But judging from Celestial Master Zhang's reaction when facing this sword, it could at least buy me time to escape. That's right, I had already made preparations to escape. It wasn't that I didn't care about the lives of Su Kuan and the Su family, But it was really unwise to stay in the face of a monster who was half a step into the Shaju realm. With this thought in mind, I nervously stared at the black-cloaked monster. The tens of thousands of small golden swords were about to reach his face, but at this moment, he let out a soft snort. His hands, which had been behind his back, suddenly stretched out. Immediately, a wave of black smoke rolled, turning into a wall in midair. Although the wall was thick black smoke, it was unusually hard. The moment the thousands of small golden swords hit the wall, they immediately turned into golden light and dissipated. Even after being hit repeatedly, the wall wasn't damaged in the slightest. Looking at this scene, I was so shocked that I couldn't speak. This was the strongest attack that I could use now, and it was the only thing that I could rely on to escape from a person who was half a step into the Shaju realm. But such an attack was easily resolved by the black-cloaked monster. Could it be that my guess was wrong? Was he not half a step into the Shaju realm, but a true Shaju realm? In my shock, I even had this thought. At this moment, the black-cloaked monster was already close to me, but he didn't directly attack me. Instead, he seemed to be interested in me. After examining me for a moment, he said, "I heard that you are a genius of the human race that only appears once in 1,000 years. Why is your cultivation so low?" My cultivation was so low. I didn't know if he was mocking me or doubting me, but I'd almost used all my trump cards and still couldn't stop him even a step. At this moment, I didn't have the time to think about his tone, but how to save my life today. If I wanted to fight to the death, I could naturally rely on the Yang spirit in my life palace. If I used the power of the Yang spirit, I could use the Xin Yuan sword to release even more power. But in the face of this monster with unfathomable strength, it was meaningless. If I used the Yang spirit, I might be able to bring him some trouble, but it wouldn't be enough to kill him. I wasn't even sure if I could hurt him. And if I used the Yang spirit, I could only wait for death. The final result would be no different from courting death. In the silence, the black-cloaked monster suddenly stretched out a finger and pointed it at my forehead. He continued in a hoarse voice, "The power of a god isn't something that an ant like you can enjoy. It's better to offer it to me." After saying that, his finger had already touched my forehead. In an instant, I felt this strange spiritual energy in my body rush to the top of my head. At the same time, I felt a sense of exhaustion, as if all the strength in my body had been sucked out in an instant. Just as I was in despair, I didn't expect that after the strange spiritual energy reached the top of my head, it didn't leave my body. Instead, it changed direction and headed towards my life palace. The monster seemed to have noticed that something was strange, and he increased the strength of his finger. In an instant, the feeling of exhaustion in my body became even stronger, and my ears were buzzing. But the strange thing was that my mind was very clear at this moment, and there was a faint, powerful force in my life palace that was trying to break free. At first, I thought that this force was the power of the god that had entered my life palace, but after a while, the Yang spirit had taken the initiative to rush out of my life palace and hover above my head without my urging. At this moment, the sun god was enveloped in a layer of golden light. After it appeared, the golden light instantly erupted, illuminating the surrounding area. Following that, the black-robed monster in front of me let out a muffled groan as his body was thrown far away. Until then, I still didn't know what had happened. After hesitating for a while, I recovered some of my strength. I hastily checked my body and found that the strange spiritual energy in my body, which was the so-called power of a god, hadn't been sucked out. It was just that the chi of witchcraft and chi were lacking. Just as I finished checking my body, the black-cloaked monster reappeared in front of me. At this moment, there was a big hole in his chest, but perhaps the monster race was born with a cheap life, as the wound didn't seem to affect him at all. After he reappeared in front of me, he didn't even get angry. Instead, he stared at me with a burning gaze, as if he had found a treasure in the world. I didn't know why he looked like that, but I took the opportunity to adjust my breathing and try to quickly recover my cultivation. I wanted to use my strongest attack to find a chance to escape. After about half a minute, the black-cloaked monster's gaze finally calmed down, and he spoke again. Chapter 895. The Power of the Monster Emperor? I was a bit confused. The power that had just been released from the young god was extremely strong, but I had never sensed it before. Was this the power of the Monster Emperor? I didn't say anything, but the black-robed demonic race expert seemed to have gone berserk. He glared at me and asked, "You have the power of a god puppet and the power of a monster emperor. Who are you?" How could I tell him this? If I told him the truth, that I was the monster emperor, he probably wouldn't believe me. However, looking at him now, I was sure that the demonic race of the mountain and sea realm also revered the monster emperor. Otherwise, they wouldn't be called the monster emperor. The black-robed demonic race expert questioned me for a long time. Seeing that I didn't respond, he seemed to have lost his last bit of patience. An ominous glint appeared in his eyes, and black smoke rose from his hands. "Brat, tell me your name. Otherwise, I'll skin you, tear apart your tendons, and search your soul. Then I'll ask you." As he spoke, he seemed to be preparing to attack. Facing such a powerful black-robed demonic race expert, the only thing I could do was buy some time. Just as I was about to speak, a black shadow appeared in the distance. In the blink of an eye, it was right in front of me. Ignoring me, it coldly said to the black-robed demonic race expert, "Impudent. You don't deserve to know his name." My eyes went wide. Why would the evil, sacrificial spirit suddenly appear? Could it be that he had been following me all this time? Before I could figure it out, the evil sacrificial spirit flicked his robe, creating a whirlwind that dispersed the black smoke in the black-robed demonic race expert's hands. From the aura he gave off, it seemed that the evil, sacrificial spirit's cultivation base was even more powerful than before. I guessed that the opening of the mountain and sea realm had brought him great benefits. The sudden appearance of the evil, sacrificial spirit shocked the black-robed, demonic race expert. Clearly, he hadn't noticed that someone was watching him. Feeling a bit apprehensive, he stared at the evil, sacrificial spirit for a long time, then asked in a hoarse voice, "Who are you?" Hearing the question, the evil sacrificial spirit didn't give him any face. He laughed coldly and said, "You don't deserve to know either." After being humiliated twice in a row, the black-robed demon revealed his ferocity. He simply didn't pursue the matter of Chun-Chi's identity and said coldly, "Aren't you a little too arrogant? Our cultivations are equally matched. I'd like to see where your confidence comes from." With that, the demonic race expert disappeared and reappeared in front of the evil sacrificial spirit in the blink of an eye. Black smoke appeared in his hands again as he attacked. He suddenly launched an attack, but the evil spirit of the priest did not hesitate. He crossed his hands that were overflowing with witchcraft aura and slapped towards the demon. In the blink of an eye, their palms met. At the point where their palms met, two balls of energy tore at each other, emitting squeaking sounds. Two demon demonic emperor, the two demonic demi emperor god strong, the two demon two god mu and mu, the power, they the god, they emperor they and I they. They didn't dare to relax in such a stalemate. The power in their bodies surged unceasingly to their palms. While they counteracted each other, they constantly replenished each other. After a few seconds, a sphere containing two different powers appeared in the center of their palms. The two powers were constantly tearing at each other in the sphere. As the two of them were in a stalemate, their sizes kept increasing. Not long after, they became a few meters in size. While I was shocked, the two powers in the sphere seemed to have reached a saturation point, and they constantly made squeaking sounds. Before I could react, the two of them stopped attacking. The demonic race expert retreated, while the evil, sacrificial spirit dashed towards me. He picked me up and ran far away. As soon as I left the place, I heard a rumbling sound behind me. Immediately after, a strong gust of wind blew in all directions. The gust of wind was extremely fast, but the evil sacrificial spirit's speed wasn't slow either. Even though I could feel the gust of wind around me as I flew away, its power was similar to that of normal wind. After we landed steadily on the ground, I hastily looked behind me. The place where we had been standing was now a complete mess. There wasn't a single intact thing in the surroundings. Even the ground had been forcefully opened up to a depth of 10 meters. It could be seen that the power that had been used during the battle between the two was terrifying. Fortunately, even though the air wave was strong, it didn't affect a large area. Only 100 meters around us were affected. Moreover, we were standing at a corner of the Sioux family's manor. Only the garden was damaged, and the other important buildings weren't damaged. As for the Sioux family members, they had already hidden far away, so they weren't affected. Not long after we stopped, the black-robed demonic race expert chased after us. He was rather valiant. Seeing that the evil sacrificial spirit wasn't any weaker than him, he didn't have any intention of retreating. Instead, his eyes lit up as though he was eager to fight. He shouted, "I didn't think that there would be an expert like you in the human world. I have underestimated a hero of the human race. Today, you and I will fight to the death." As he said that, the black-robed figure remained at his original position, but the demonic race expert had already closed in on me. Seeing that the two of them were about to fight, the evil sacrificial spirit extended his hand and threw me 100 meters away before he started fighting with the demonic race expert. I naturally couldn't interfere in the battle between two experts that were half a step into the Shaju realm, so I could only observe from the side. This time, the two of them didn't clash head-on like before. Instead, they seemed to be probing each other. In that moment, they were in a deadlock. Seeing this situation, I didn't stay here for long. When Su Kuan was communicating with me, he wasn't in a good state. Since this was a good opportunity, I might as well save him first. With that thought, I looked around and quickly found the Su family members hiding in the distance. I quickly went in front of them and asked them where Su Kuan was hiding. After the previous incident, they weren't on guard against me and quickly brought me to the secret room that Su Kuan was hiding in. Very quickly, we arrived at the hidden room of the Su family and saw Su Kuan, who was already unconscious. At that moment, his entire body was covered in wounds. Blood was scattered all over the ground, and his face was as pale as paper. When the elders of the Sioux clan saw this, they became even more flustered. They hurriedly went up to check, and only after confirming that Su Kuan still had a breath left did they relax slightly. Afterwards, they tried to help Su Kuan heal in a flurry. Seeing this, I hurriedly stopped them and walked forward to help Su Kuan up. I placed my hands on his shoulders, and the strange spiritual power in my body circulated through Su Kuan's body. Then, I used my Dao Qi to transfer it to him. Around half an hour later, Su Kuan woke up. After looking at the elders of the Su family, his eyes finally landed on me. He smiled and said weakly, "I knew that Brother Zhou would be able to save my Su family. Thank you." After he said that, the elders of the Su family surrounded him. All of them had worried and doting expressions as they continuously checked his body. It was obvious that everyone in the Su clan was especially concerned about Su Kuan, and it was no wonder that everyone accepted death calmly and only sent him into the secret chamber when they encountered danger earlier. At that moment, Su Kuan's body had already recovered. Due to my trust in the sacrificial evil spirit, I didn't stay in the secret room for long. After all, the secret room wasn't big, and it didn't feel good to have so many people squeezing in there. The people of the Su family didn't want to go out, but Su Kuan trusted me and followed me out. The other elders of the Su family naturally followed. After returning to the surface, the sacrificial evil spirit and the monster were still locked in battle. It could be seen that their cultivations were about the same, and they couldn't do anything to each other. This was within my expectations. After all, they were all at the level of half-step Shaju. At this level, they were only half a step away from becoming true immortals. All of them were exceedingly powerful, and it would be difficult to determine the victor in a short period of time, let alone kill them. It was practically impossible. After observing for a moment, the two people in the battle suddenly stopped their movements with great tacit understanding, and both retreated dozens of meters back. I didn't know what was going on, but in a blink of an eye, their bodies changed. A large amount of shaman energy suddenly appeared around the sacrificial evil spirit. The density of the shaman energy was beyond my imagination. It seemed to have condensed into a physical form and covered his entire body. On the other side, the black-robed monster's body surged with demonic energy. Black smoke surged and covered his body as well. After doing all that, the two of them disappeared from where they were at the same time. Soon after, the sounds of fighting could be heard in the surroundings, but the two of them could not be seen at all. Every time the sounds of fighting were heard, there would be a wave of chi that would create cracks in the ground. Under this strange and terrifying situation, the Sioux family and I hid far away and held our breaths as we silently waited for the result. Originally, I trusted the sacrificial evil spirit very much. However, after so many battles, there was still no result. Even I felt a little uneasy and was prepared to hide in the secret room again. Fortunately, after a short while, the sound of fighting stopped and the two figures appeared in the air again. Under such an intense battle, even the powerful sacrificial evil spirit seemed to be unable to endure. After he reappeared, his chest heaved up and down and his body trembled slightly. On the other hand, the monster was in an even worse state. Black smoke was emitting from his chest, and the black robe that he wore was in a mess. There were many tears on it. It was obvious that he had been injured. It seemed that my previous worries were unnecessary. The sacrificial evil spirit still had the upper hand. After a short pause, the sacrificial evil spirit produced a ball of thick shaman energy in his hand. He didn't directly attack the black-robed monster, but instead waved his hand and scattered it in the air. Following his action, a black cloud suddenly appeared in the originally clear sky. It hovered above the monster's head. The black cloud surged, and there seemed to be lightning accumulating in it, gradually pressing downwards. The pressure from the black cloud was extremely strong. I could feel it even though I was standing far away. Moreover, as the black cloud pressed downwards, the pressure increased. After a few seconds, I was unable to resist, and my back bent. The Sioux family members behind me had already fallen to the ground, almost unconscious. I hurriedly urged the magical power in my body to quickly recover the witchcraft energy in my body. Then, I stood up straight and helped the Sioux family members to share some of the pressure. Only then did I manage to prevent them from getting hurt. I lifted my head to look at the battle in the sky. At that moment, the black-robed monster stood still while a silver lightning suddenly struck from the black cloud. However, the strange thing was that the lightning didn't shoot at the black-robed monster, but at the sacrificial evil spirit. I was shocked as I thought that something had happened. However, the silver lightning reached the front of the sacrificial evil spirit. It didn't attack his body, but the ball of shaman energy in his hands. Originally, the ball of shaman energy in his hands was only the size of a fist. However, after the silver lightning shot into it, it instantly expanded to a diameter of 10 meters. Then, the ball of shaman energy that carried the power of lightning exploded and turned into raindrops that filled the sky. In the next second, as the sacrificial evil spirit waved his hand, tens of thousands of raindrops shot at the black-robed monster in the distance. Seeing such a divine power, the black-robed monster naturally wouldn't sit still and wait for death. When the magical raindrops arrived in front of him, he suddenly straightened his body and let out a low roar. Then, countless amounts of monster energy shot up to the sky. However, it was a pity that the monster energy that shot up to the sky was like a mantis trying to stop a chariot when it faced the sacrificial evil spirit's all-out attack. It couldn't form an effective defense and was instantly pierced through by the magical raindrops. Moreover, the raindrops didn't slow down and continued to pierce through his body. While the raindrops pierced through his body, the black cloud that hovered above his head suddenly descended and directly hit his broken body. After the two collided, there was an earth-shaking explosion. Smoke and dust filled the air. Even I, who was standing far away, felt the earth shake. Under such power, I originally thought that the black-robed monster wouldn't be able to escape. However, I didn't expect that a black light would dart out from the smoke and dust at an extremely fast speed. In the blink of an eye, it had reached the horizon. At the same time, a voice came from afar. Chapter 896. Wu Juzui. This was a strange name, but it seemed to complement his identity as a member of the monster race. As the voice faded away, the monster race cultivator had long since disappeared. When I looked away, I saw that the evil sacrificial spirit had suddenly fallen from the sky and hit the ground. I was so shocked that I couldn't react. After he landed, I rushed over to check on him. The evil sacrificial spirit hadn't fainted yet. His eyes were still open. When I arrived in front of him, he waved his hand to stop me from checking his body. He lowered his voice and said to me, "I'm just a little tired. It's not a big deal. I'll recover soon." Then he adjusted his body, sat cross-legged, and began to adjust his breathing. Seeing that he was fine, I breathed a sigh of relief, but I was still quite shocked. The evil sacrificial spirit was Chiyo's true self. Although he wasn't as strong as he had been in the past, he still had all sorts of magical techniques, which could be seen from his attack just now. As for Wu Juzui, his cultivation base was similar to the evil sacrificial spirits, but he had been able to force him to this state. It was truly inconceivable. After about a quarter of an hour, the evil sacrificial spirit opened his eyes, and a black light flickered in them. Clearly, he had recovered his cultivation base. I was finally able to relax. Seeing that he was fine, I asked about Wu Juzui. The evil sacrificial spirit told me that the surname Wu was a common surname of the monster race. Although he didn't recognize Wu Juzui, he was clearly a greater monster of the mountain and sea realm. It was normal for him to have all sorts of divine abilities. Hearing him say that, my interest was piqued. Although the mountain and sea realm had been opened, no one in the outside world knew anything about the monster race. From what the evil sacrificial spirit had said, it seemed that there were many surnames within the monster race. If I could learn more about the monster race's social structure, it would be of great help in the fight against the monster race. I was very interested, but the evil sacrificial spirit didn't want to talk about it. He shook his head and didn't say anything more about the monster race. He sighed and said, "I can't recover my cultivation base for the time being, but an ant surnamed Wu was able to escape from me." He clearly wasn't satisfied with the result, but after sighing, he didn't continue the topic. Instead, he asked me why I had a conflict with Wu Juzui. I hesitated for a while, but decided to tell him my conjecture about the monster race robbing the 10 divine tools. The evil spirit was also a member of the demonic tribe, and although he might not be on the same side as the demonic tribe of the mountain and sea realm, it was still possible that he knew something about the matter and might even be able to get some information from him. Hearing this, the evil sacrificial spirit frowned slightly. After pondering for a moment, it muttered, "It really has come to this step?" Sure enough, the sacrificial evil spirit knew something. I wanted to ask more, but he waved his hand. "It's also good for you. However, it's not the time for you to know. Don't ask anymore." He directly rejected me. Feeling helpless, I could only keep my mouth shut. Not far away, the members of the Su family had already recovered, and they all walked over to thank the evil spirit. The evil spirit's status was extraordinary, and he didn't pay any attention to the Su family members who came to offer their thanks. I had been hoping to persuade them, and now that the crisis had occurred, it was a good opportunity to strike while the iron was hot. How could I miss this opportunity? I warmly chatted with the Su family members for a while, and then they invited me to the Su family manor, which was still in good condition. When we arrived, Su Kuin and the old man who led the group stayed behind to chat with us. The others excused themselves and left, saying that they had to deal with the aftermath. After they left, Su Kuin introduced the old man who had stayed behind. He was his grandfather, the previous patriarch of the Su family. He had been in secluded meditation for many years and had only come out of seclusion after the calamity that had befallen the Su family. He had never imagined that he would be unable to stop the demonic beast's rampage. At this point, Su Kuin's grandfather's expression was downcast. Although the Su family wasn't the most powerful of the metaphysical clans, they were still a famous family. Now that they had suffered such a calamity, it was likely that they wouldn't be able to recover within 100 years. After listening to him, I added, "In today's world, I'm afraid that the Sioux family won't be the only ones suffering. If the monster race isn't exterminated, no one will be able to live in peace." Old Man Sioux had heard Su Kuan's persuasion earlier, so he naturally understood the meaning behind my words. He sighed. "If it wasn't for Taoist Zhou coming to rescue us today, my Sioux family would have been wiped out. When I was young, I had a body of steel, but now that I'm old, I've lost my ambition. How can my Sioux family not take revenge for the calamity that has befallen us today?" After saying that, he turned to look at Su Kuan and continued, "Kuan, your father has died. From today onwards, you will inherit the position of patriarch. You will also discuss the matter of expelling the monster race with Taoist Zhou." Although he didn't say explicitly, it was obvious that he had tacitly agreed to the matter by helping Su Kuan to the position of patriarch. Hearing that, Su Kuan respectfully kowtowed to the old man, officially taking over the Sioux family. After Su Kuan bowed, I also cupped my hands at the old man to show that I wouldn't let him down. The Sioux family was the first step in the metaphysical era. With the Sioux family as an example, the other metaphysical families would gradually show their attitude under the pressure of the monster race. However, this matter needed to be planned slowly, so it wasn't urgent. Since this matter was over, I didn't stay here any longer and returned to Medicine King Valley with the sacrificial evil spirit. At this time, Su Kuan had just become the patriarch. Since the Sioux family had suffered a disaster, there were many things to deal with, so I didn't bring him back. I just asked him to go to Medicine King Valley after he had dealt with the Sioux family's affairs. At that time, we would discuss the matter of joining the Witchcraft Alliance. On the way back to Medicine King Valley, I kept thinking about whether it was appropriate to bring the sacrificial evil spirit back to Medicine King Valley. After all, the sacrificial evil spirit was a member of the monster race. At this time, the Medicine King Valley was in full swing preparing to fight against the monster race. At that time, it might cause the sacrificial evil spirit's hatred. Although I wasn't worried that the sacrificial evil spirit would take action, I couldn't guarantee this matter, so I couldn't help but worry. After thinking for a long time, I told the sacrificial evil spirit about joining the Witchcraft Alliance and asked for his opinion. After listening to me, the sacrificial evil spirit didn't change his expression. He just shook his head and said, "It's a trivial matter. If you want to do it, just do it. You don't need to ask for my opinion." I was puzzled, so I asked, "You want to pose it?" The sacrificial evil spirit shook his head. "I'm happy that you can pull yourself together and find something to do. Why would I oppose it?" I was speechless. I didn't know what the sacrificial evil spirit was thinking, but since he didn't oppose it, I didn't say anything more. After returning to Medicine King Valley, I met the fatty and Officer Wong before I entered the village. They were heading out with a group of people. When they saw me, they looked happy and hurried to greet me. When we were discussing how to resist the monster clan, I'd sent a message to Officer Wong. During my absence, he had led the people of Wanwu Wonderland to this place and joined the Witchcraft Alliance. After talking with him, I learned that Jinren Guan had been in charge of the Witchcraft Alliance while I was away. He had divided several defensive strongholds according to the previous plan, and they were heading to one of those strongholds to be stationed there. Since they had taken over the garrison, they couldn't stay for long. After telling me where they would be stationed, they bid farewell to me and hurriedly left the Medicine King Valley. After they left, I looked at the back of the fatty, who was in a hurry, and felt quite amused. With Spiritual Master Guan's presence and White E's restraint, Fatty, this mischievous fellow, now seemed to be somewhat motivated. When I returned to the village, I went to see Jinren Guan and listened to him talk about the deployment of manpower in various places. Currently, the Witchcraft Alliance was short of manpower, so almost everyone had been sent out. There were only a few dozen people left in the Medicine King Valley, most of which were the children I had brought back. After listening to Spiritual Master Guan's report, I took the evil sacrificial spirit back to my room to rest. Previously, the evil sacrificial spirit had said that he didn't care about the Witchcraft Alliance. Obviously, he wasn't being perfunctory. After hearing so many things, his face remained indifferent. Clearly, he didn't care about it all. This made me curious. Earlier, when we were outside the mountain and sea realm, he would rather oppose me in order to ensure that the mountain and sea realm would open without a hitch. At first, I assumed that he was doing the same thing as Nangong and wanted the demon folk to return to the world of the living. But now, it seems that he doesn't care about that at all. That's completely different from what I imagined. I can't help but wonder what his true goal is in opening the mountain and sea realm. After returning to my room, I couldn't hold back my curiosity and finally asked him. After hearing my question, the evil sacrificial spirit was silent for a moment, then said, "My purpose in opening the mountain and sea realm is related to you, but I can't say for sure what it is. Do you remember when I told you that you, and Swan and I, would meet again in the future?" I was surprised. I didn't know why the evil sacrificial spirit would suddenly change the topic to this. I didn't take his words to heart at that time, and thought that they were just perfunctory words. But now that I heard him say it again, it seemed that wasn't the case. I nodded and looked at the evil sacrificial spirit, waiting for his explanation. To some extent, my purpose is related to this matter. Originally, you and Swan and I would only meet once every 6 months. Previously, I told you that if you want Swan and I to be free, you have to change the rules of heaven and earth. In fact, the situation hasn't changed. You just don't have the opportunity to meet once every 6 months. Chapter 897. Every time the evil sacrificial spirit brought up these specious questions, I knew that he would shut his mouth and only give me a vague hope. That was indeed the case. When I asked him again, he told me that I would know the answer soon and that it wasn't the right time to tell me. He just told me to work hard on my cultivation. I couldn't do anything if he didn't tell me, but I was still a little excited. No matter what, the evil sacrificial spirit had given me a little hope. Just as he had said, the only thing I had lost was the opportunity to see Tao Wu every 6 months. In fact, I had to continue doing many things to help Tao Wu break free from the heavenly law. If the evil sacrificial spirit didn't lie to me, nothing had changed. After talking about Tao Wu, I became silent and prepared to meditate. After all, I'd been injured in the Su family and had consumed a lot of my cultivation. But before I started meditating, I felt this strange spiritual power in my body. After thinking for a while, I asked the evil sacrificial spirit what was the God's power in my body. As I had expected, the evil sacrificial spirit knew about this. His expression didn't change as he said, "The God's power is the power of a God. You have a special identity. It's not strange that you've awakened the God's power as your cultivation increases." What he said made sense. After listening to him, I wanted to ask more questions. I opened my mouth, but I didn't know what to ask. After thinking for a while, I asked again, "Besides the God's power, there is another powerful force in my yang spirit that isn't inferior to the God's power." Wu Jizui once injured Wu Jizui. He called it the Monster Emperor's power. I wanted to describe the power in the yang spirit in detail, but the evil sacrificial spirit answered, "A power that isn't inferior to the God's power is naturally the God's power." Wu Jizui was right. This is the Monster Emperor's God's power. The Monster Emperor's God's power. So, the other strange spiritual power should be Emperor Ku's God's power? Or was it Xuanyuan's God's power? While he was deep in thought, the evil sacrificial spirit spoke again. "The God's power in your body originates from your ancestral inheritance. However, when the demon emperor was sent into the cycle of reincarnation, only a small portion of the God's power remained. The rest had long since dissipated. Thus, what you've awakened now is a small portion of the God's power that was left behind. Of course, even if it's just a small portion, it's still extremely beneficial to you. When you cultivate, you need to comprehend more and strengthen it." His words confirmed that the mystical power in my body had indeed originated from an ancient inheritance. No wonder I had such great power. No wonder Wu Jizui coveted it. With that in mind, the ghoul priest continued, "I came here to warn you that you must be careful to conceal the godly power inside of you. As the mountain and sea realm opens, immortal bright bloom will gradually appear. If they discover the godly power inside of you, they will go all out to fight over it. If that happens, not even I can save you. Would the power of a god cause the Xiaoju immortals to fight over it? After thinking about it for a moment, I understood. This godly power was the power of the Demon Emperor and Xianyuan. Their cultivation bases were naturally higher than immortal bright blooms, and their power surpassed that of immortal bright blooms. Therefore, it was only natural that they would covet it. From that, it seemed that after immortal bright bloom's cultivation base, there would be differences in power. I wanted to ask the evil sacrificial spirit about this, but he spoke first. Your internal injuries haven't completely healed yet. First, adjust your breathing and focus on gaining enlightenment of the godly power. Since he had already spoken, I didn't press him any further. I did as he said, sat down cross-legged, and began to adjust my breathing and restore my cultivation base. A few hours later, my internal injuries were completely healed. Thanks to the godly power, my cultivation base was completely restored. During the entire process, I focused on gaining enlightenment of the godly power, but in the end, I didn't gain anything. Since the godly power surpassed immortal bright bloom's power, it would be strange if I could comprehend it with my current cultivation base. It would be better to study it later. I couldn't rush it. After I finished adjusting my body, it was already the next morning. The evil sacrificial spirit was still meditating, so I didn't disturb him. I stood up and stretched my body, ready to go out. However, as soon as I pushed the door open, I saw Bai Ling walking toward my room from not far away. She was the master of the Medicine King Valley. At this time, she had arranged for people to be stationed outside, but she had stayed behind to manage the affairs of the valley. Seeing me come out, she quickly walked toward me. After greeting me, she told me that she had come because little Wang Li wanted to see me. She was worried that I had just returned and didn't know if there were any other matters, so she came to see the situation first. Hearing her mention little Wang Li, I remembered the young children I had brought back. Yesterday, Jinren Guan had told me that there were very few people left in the valley. I didn't know if there was anyone taking care of the young children. Since there was nothing else to do, I didn't want to disturb the evil, sacrificial spirit. I followed Bai Ling to see the situation of the young children. Soon, we arrived at the place where the young children were placed. As soon as we entered, I heard cries coming from the house. When I got closer, I found that the doors of this row of houses were locked, and the cries were coming from inside. Seeing me frown, Bai Ling hurriedly explained, "At this time, there's a shortage of manpower in the valley, so I'm taking care of these young children." After the initial panic, they all wanted to go home. At first, one or two could be calmed down, but later, dozens of young children cried at the same time. She was helpless. In order to ensure that they didn't run away, she could only use this method. Bai Ling's words were true. These young children were still young, so they couldn't be expected to be as sensible as adults. If they were distressed together, Bai Ling alone wouldn't be able to take care of them. However, these young children were orphans. Most of them would have to stay in the King of Medicine Valley in the future. It wasn't a good idea in the long run. I was a little worried. After I pushed the door open, the young children in the house cried even louder when they saw someone come in. Many of them were rolling on the ground, and some of them were tired. They were sleeping soundly on the bed. The house was a mess. I glanced around. Among the many young children, only little Wang Li was sitting on the bed, meditating. His face was calm, and he didn't look anxious at all. Seeing this scene, I felt quite gratified. After little Wang Li was born, he had suffered a lot. Every time he had an attack, I felt quite scared. However, this little fellow always blinked his big eyes calmly and never cried. At that time, I felt that he was quite extraordinary. Later on, he sacrificed to the evil spirit and was freed from his suffering. Zhang Qianwen then taught him the techniques of Mount One. At such a young age, he had already gradually sensed the existence of the Qi of Tao. It was reasonable that he had such a strong character. After watching for a moment, little Wang Li seemed to sense the movement around him and open his eyes. When he saw me, he immediately smiled. He jumped off the bed and walked to me. He didn't rush to hug me like other children of his age, but knelt down and called me Martial Uncle. It wasn't a bad thing to be mature at a young age, but going too far was as bad as not going far enough. I smiled and picked him up. You said that you wanted to see me. Is there something wrong? Wang Li, who was like an adult, naturally didn't want to see me just because he missed me. After I asked, he nodded and replied in his childish voice, Martial Uncle, I've been back here with these children for some time. Due to the lack of people to take care of them, they have been crying nonstop. Aunt Bai Ling and I have tried our best to take care of them. If this continues, there will definitely be problems. Hearing his words, I was shocked. I originally thought that this little fellow was mature at a young age, but who knew that he would be so mature that he could actually think of these things on his own initiative? I turned to look at Bai Ling. She also looked surprised and waved at me. I'm also worried about this problem, but I haven't told Xiao Li about it. How old is he? Why would he think of such a problem? Hearing what Bai Ling said, Wang Li shrunk his head in embarrassment before continuing. When Master left, he asked me to stay behind to help Martial Uncle take care of Medicine King Valley. I'm young and can't do anything else, so I can only think about the small things around me. This little fellow wasn't just sensible, he wasn't much different from an adult. I smiled and scratched his nose. Then I asked, since you think that it's not good to continue like this, have you thought about how to solve this problem? At this time, there was no solution to the lack of manpower. I also felt that this problem was tricky, so I just asked casually without any intention of testing him. However, I didn't expect Wang Li to really have an idea. He tilted his head and thought for a while, then said to me, I think that Aunt Bai Ling and I should work a little harder for the time being to take care of them. But to solve this problem in the long run, we have to find something for them to do so that they won't be confused and afraid anymore. What he said was very reasonable, but this was a group of 6 to 7-year-old children. What could they do? I continued to ask. Wang Li seemed to have an answer in his heart, so he didn't think much and answered directly, I think we should teach them Tao techniques. Hearing that, I immediately stared with my eyes wide open. What little Wang Li said was right. These children were originally captured from the monster race that I had killed and possessed spiritual roots. Their talents could be said to be outstanding. In the current situation of the human world, we were in urgent need of manpower, and the battle with the monster race wasn't something that could be done overnight. These children were the best targets for nurturing. As the scale of the battle expanded in the future, there would definitely be heavy casualties. So, inheritance was the first thing to consider. After thinking about it carefully, I would definitely be able to think of this, but it was really scary that Wang Li could think of this before me. I was silent for a long time before I asked Wang Li, how did you think of this idea? Wang Li tilted his head and thought for a while before replying with a smile. Master told me a few days ago that there are many monster race people, and we have very few people. There are even fewer people with high cultivation, so the situation against the monster race isn't optimistic. He also told me to grow up quickly, so that when my cultivation is high, I can help Master Uncle to fight against the monster race. At that time, I thought that I definitely wouldn't be able to do it alone. If these children could be like me and become very powerful in the future, then they would be able to help Master Uncle. Originally, I thought that he could think of all this, just like what he said earlier, to find something for the children to do. Although cultivation is boring, but once they have some abilities, they would naturally be able to solve the problem of their confusion and fear. However, after hearing Wang Li's reply, I was sure that he wasn't just simply finding something for them to do. He was just like me, still looking at the long term. Even though his thoughts might have been inspired by Zhang Canwen, but for a 5 to 6-year-old child, the expression of such thoughts was too abnormal. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.